Chapter 101, First Mission. Please order first. Urza strode into the guild hall, the monstrous demon horn cradled in her hand like a trophy. The echo of its impact sent a tremor through the wooden floorboards and hushed the chatter of every guild member. Lucian and Lucy exchanged wide-eyed glances as Mirajane hurried over to them, her face pale. "That horn alone is half as tall as this building," she whispered. Whoever that demon was, its body must have been the size of the entire guild. It was terrifying. Lucy covered her mouth in shock. Lucian felt a surge of awe and a bit of fear. He'd heard S-class mages were powerful, but this, battling a demon rising over 10 meters tall, it was almost unbelievable. And if Urza Scarlet could do it, perhaps she really was the strongest of them all. Urza planted the horn on the floor with a decisive thud, then shifted her armor-clad hips and raised her voice. "All right, everyone, listen up." She swept her gaze across the hall, where guild members were still picking themselves up off the tables and shaking out their hair. "Fairy Tale, you're notorious for causing chaos, and I've heard all about your drunken dancing and reckless pranks. President Makarov may forgive you, but I won't be so lenient." She pointed at a group of guild wizards clustered around a broken table. "Kana, that's no way to drink. And you," she said to a bard who was still strumming a lute, "if you want to dance, take it outside. Don't clog up the tables in here." A hush fell over the hall as every eye turned to Urza. Lucian watched Lucy bite her lip, silently egging him on to speak up. But Urza wasn't done. "If I find any of you treating the guild like it's your personal playground again," she warned, "I'll confiscate your guild card, and your toy wands too. Understood?" Murmurs of, "Yes, Urza?" rippled through the crowd. The bailiff of the hall straightened a splint on a bench, and even the bards put away their instruments. Lucian felt the tension ease as the guild returned to order, but the thrill of witnessing Urza's power and her unwavering authority lingered in the air. Lucy nudged Lucian, her eyes sparkling. "First mission accomplished, and what a return," she whispered. Lucian nodded, determination stealing his features. If this was the kind of magic and camaraderie Fairy Tale thrived on, he was more eager than ever to see what lay ahead. Lucian couldn't help but stare as the other mages fell completely silent before Urza. Even Natsu and Gray, who would boldly shout down the guildmaster herself, had puckered up like obedient brothers in her presence. Lucy watched in awe. "She really is Fairy Tale's big sister, the Queen of the Fairies," Lucian whispered to himself. He'd spent long enough in the guild to know everyone's temperament, and Fairy Tale was nothing if not fiercely independent. Strength gaps never settled debates, brawls broke out at the drop of a hat, yet today no one dared so much as mutter a protest. It was clear just how formidable Urza's standing was among her peers. Just then, Urza, fresh from finishing her training circle, spotted Lucian and Lucy lingering at the edge of the hall. With her armor gleaming under the guild's lanterns, she strode over. Folding her arms, she offered them a half-smile. "Are you both new members?" she asked in a calm, authoritative tone. Lucian stepped forward, swallowing his nerves. "Yes, Urza. I'm Lucian, and this is Lucy. We've just joined." Urza nodded, her expression softening slightly. "Welcome to Fairy Tale. Make yourselves at home, and remember, no matter who you are, you'll find nobody here pulls any punches." She paused, eyes glinting with challenge. "But if you train hard and stick together, you'll fit right in." Lucy and Lucian exchanged excited, relieved glances. Within these walls, under the watchful eye of their guild's Queen of the Fairies, they finally felt they'd found their place. Lucy's heart skipped a beat, and she almost tripped over her own feet as she stepped forward, offering her hand. "I'm Lucy," she said, forcing a smile. "I just joined the guild. I'd be grateful for any advice you can give me." Urza smiled warmly. "There's no need to be so formal. Think of this place as your second home. We're all family here." She clasped Lucy's shoulders, her eyes suddenly brightening. "Lucy, is it? When I first arrived in town, I heard you defeated that vicious Vulcan gorilla with a single finger. Amazing work." Lucy's face went pale. The memory of her first mission still stung. She and Natsu had fought side by side to rescue Macau. It was definitely Natsu's fiery magic that had done most of the damage. She'd only provided support. One finger? Ridiculous. Before she could sputter a denial, another voice joined in. A young man stepped forward, grinning, and held out a hand, paws embroidered on the back, a playful nod to the guild's mascot cat. "I'm Lucian," he said. "I joined on the same day as Lucy. I look forward to your guidance." Urza gave him a nod of approval. "Welcome, Lucian. You two will fit right in." Relief washed over Lucy. She wasn't the only newcomer. With Urza's encouragement and Lucian's friendly presence, she finally felt like she truly belonged in fairy tale. Urza studied Lucian from head to toe and nodded to herself. "Lucian," she said, "I always thought the guildmaster was a one-of-a-kind weirdo, almost alien. But it turns out you're the same species. Your magic's aura even complements Laxus's perfectly. You two would make an unstoppable team." Lucian blinked. "Aura match?" he echoed, surprised. Mirajane, standing beside Urza, gave a soft laugh. "Don't get too excited," she teased. "The president won't allow Lucian and Laxus to pair up." Urza frowned at that. She knew all too well about Laxus's strained relationship with the president. Laxus spent most of his time on distant missions and only returned a few times each year. If Lucian were assigned to work with him, he'd never be around to fulfill his duties as the guild's firefighter. But when Mirajane mentioned Lucian's unrivaled repair magic, Urza's eyes sparkled with a new idea. Without warning, she scooped him up in a fierce hug. Lucian tensed in her arms as she grinned. "Team up with me," she declared. "I hold back every time I cast my spells because I'm terrified of wrecking the town. Even when I complete a mission, I'm never satisfied. With your repairs backing me up, I could go all out, and we'd finish twice as fast." Lucian felt his heart race at the prospect. Working alongside Urza, unleashing full power without fear of collateral damage, this was an offer he couldn't dismiss lightly. Lucian wriggled free from Urza's embrace and shook his head emphatically. "No, I'm not ready to form a team yet." She'd moved with such speed and at that close range that even if he'd spotted her approach, there was no time to dodge. Under normal circumstances, a surprise hug from the Scarlet Knight might have seemed flattering. Urza was, after all, both beautiful and gracious. But today, clad head to toe in heavy armor, her arms felt like iron bands, and Lucian was glad he'd managed to break free. If he'd been any weaker, he might have actually passed out from the squeeze. Urza's disappointment was palpable. She let her arms drop and sighed. What a shame. She glanced over at Mirajane. "By the way, where's the guild master? I need to report something crucial, but I haven't seen him around." Mirajane tucked a strand of white hair behind one ear. "He went to attend a council meeting," she explained. Urza frowned thoughtfully. After a beat, she turned toward Natsu and Gray, who were lingering just behind them, and squared her shoulders, ready to move on to Plan B. Natsu and Gray, who'd been locked in a tense standoff, froze when Urza turned to address them. For a moment they simply stared, then, as if struck by the same thought, they both threw their arms around each other in excitement. "Natsu! Gray!" Urza called, her crimson armor gleaming. "On my last mission I hit an unexpected snag. I need your help. Will you come with me?" "Huh? Urza Scarlet asking for help? That's a first!" Natsu gaped. "And she wants us?" Gray's eyes went wide. Word of Urza's request rippled through Fairy Tale. Every guild member, everyone except Lucian and Lucy, buzzed with surprise and anticipation. After all, Urza was an S-class powerhouse, accustomed to tackling high-risk jobs alone on the second floor. She'd never once needed backup. This was unprecedented. "Count me in!" Natsu shouted, practically vibrating with energy. Gray nodded just as eagerly. Neither was keen on teaming up with the other under normal circumstances, but the chance to embark on a mission with Urza Scarlet was too good to pass up. "Very well," Urza said, arms folding across her chest. "Go pack your gear. We leave at dawn." With that, she lifted her chin, her metal devil horns cresting high, and strode out of the guild hall, already a step ahead of her surprised companions. As soon as Urza strode out of the guild hall, a wave of speculation rippled through the room. From the newest apprentice to the seasoned masters, everyone wondered what kind of formidable foe could demand the combined might of Urza Scarlet, Natsu Dragneel's fire, and Gray Fullbuster's ice. Rumors flew. Some even dared whisper that she was off to face a legendary dragon. In a quiet corner, Lucy Hartfilia and Lucian exchanged amused glances as they listened to the buzz of voices. Then Mirajane Strauss's cheerful call cut through the chatter. "Lucy, Lucian, I need a favor from you two." Chapter 1 and 2, Gold Medal Assistant. "What's the matter, Mirajane?" Lucy and Lucian turned as Mirajane crossed the room in long, swift strides. Before they could react, she grasped Lucy's wrist in one hand and Lucian's in the other. "I need both of you to follow Urza and the others tomorrow," Mirajane said firmly. Lucy's eyes went wide. "Me? But I'm not exactly strong enough to help." Lucian's brow furrowed. He already suspected why Mirajane had sought him out. Predictably, she offered a gentle, patient smile before explaining. "Lucy, you're perfect for keeping Natsu and Gray from tearing each other apart behind Urza's back. You can smooth things over before they blow up," Mirajane said, turning to Lucian. "And your mission is even more critical. Whether our guild president emerges unscathed from the council meeting tomorrow depends on you." "Mirajane," Lucian protested with a half-smile. "You're making it sound like I'll decide the fate of the world." Mirajane's hopeful gaze never wavered. "It sounds dramatic, I know, but with your repair magic, you can neutralize any damage they cause and protect everyone in that room." Lucian sighed, rolling his shoulders. He'd already experienced so much kindness from the president and the rest of Fairy Tale's wizards lately. How could he refuse? "All right," he said quietly. "I'll do my best." Mirajane's face lit up with relief. As Lucy offered a supportive nod, Lucian steeled himself for tomorrow's challenge. No matter how explosive Natsu and Gray got, or how tense the council meeting became, he knew he'd be ready to mend whatever broke. Lucian couldn't hide his curiosity about the trouble Urza had run into. If an S-class wizard like Urza Scarlet called it a problem, it had to be serious, perhaps even connected to the legendary Dragon Slayer crystal. Admittedly, before he fashioned the super wand, he might have hesitated. Anything that challenged an S-class wizard must carry immense risk. With his old level of power, he could easily have been wounded, or worse. But since wielding the super wand, his magic output had soared, many spells nearly 10 times stronger. Now, even if danger lay ahead, he was confident he could fight his way out, or at least retreat safely. When Lucian gave a firm nod, Lucy blinked, caught between relief and apprehension. She feared the perils that awaited them, yet she also felt a rush of excitement. This was exactly the kind of adventure she'd joined Fairy Tale to find, far removed from the sheltered life of a noble daughter. With a deep breath, she set her worries aside and agreed to go. The next morning, Lucian arrived at Magnolia City Station well before sunrise, a slim satchel slung over his shoulder. He settled on a wooden bench, reached inside, and pulled out his spellbook, already dog-eared from late-night study sessions. Though he called it a satchel, whenever he fused it with his cat clone spell, it shrank to the size of a purse, easily tucked into his coat. With his super wand at the ready and his grimoire open, Lucian studied the conjuration rituals one last time as he waited for the train that would carry them into Urza's mystery, and perhaps closer to the Dragon Slayer crystal. Lucian slipped a hand inside his pocket-sized satchel and grinned. Never underestimate a school bag. Once the super wand's traceless extension spell was woven into its lining, the interior expanded to roughly a 40-square-meter room. With that kind of storage, he could carry half a library's worth of spellbooks wherever he went, devoting every spare moment, outside of missions, to mastering new magic. He'd already tackled giant magic and light magic, and was now exploring other, more straightforward spells that would bolster his combat style. "Lucian!" The call came a few minutes later, breaking his concentration. He looked up to see Lucy arriving just as early as he had. Today, she wore a yellow tank top paired with a blue miniskirt that highlighted her lithe figure. The graceful swing of her hips as she ran caught his eye and held it. Lucy wasn't just easy on the eyes. Among Fairy Tale's female wizards, she stood out as one of the strongest thunder mages he'd ever met. No sooner had Lucy reached him than Natsu, Happy, and Gray strolled in behind her. True to form, Natsu and Gray were already bickering over who'd eaten the last sandwich, their familiar rivalry kicking off the morning's entertainment. Lucian tucked his books away with a smile. Class was about to begin. Lucian stood on the platform, glancing nervously at the departure board. The train was about to leave when Urza finally appeared, pulling a colossal luggage cart behind her. "Sorry I kept you waiting," she called, hustling aboard. Lucy's jaw dropped. Dozens of suitcases, stacked 2 and 3 high, took up half the car. "Why does she have so much luggage for a single mission?" she whispered, eyes wide. Happy flitted over Lucy's shoulder. Urza's a bit obsessive, he murmured. She insists on bringing every outfit she owns, just in case. Lucy shook her head. That's a lot of clothes. But Lucian wasn't thinking about dresses or boots. As a student of the Guild Library's spell tomes, he knew how limited most spatial or wardrobe magic really was. A typical mage could barely squeeze a single sword or shield into their pocket dimension, let alone everyday items. Only an S-class wizard could carve out enough void space for multiple weapons, and maybe a few changes of clothes. Yet here Urza was, lugging her suitcases onto the train instead of slipping them into her dimensional vault. That told Lucian exactly what he needed to know. Her hidden pocket realm must be teeming with far more magical armor and weapons than anyone had ever seen. And if that was true, this mission was about to get a lot more interesting. Lucian smiled. S-class mission rewards are generous, so I'll be fine on the money front. Aluza, if you don't mind, you can stow your luggage in my magical prop. He set his backpack on the ground and offered before she could protest. 3 goals drove him. First, to repay the guild for all the resources and support he'd received. Second, to dig up any leads on the Dragon Slayer crystal. And third, to build a rapport with the guild's top wizards, potential allies for whatever dangers might lie ahead. Aluza's eyes lit up. Lucian, you actually own a rare spatial magic item? Thank you so much. She watched in amazement as he unzipped a deceptively small pack and tucked the oversized grimoire inside. Her smile grew even wider. He really did possess a precious space storage artifact. Lucian set his small backpack on the ground, unzipped it, and activated its magnetic charm. Instantly, the magic wand, its handle looped through an iron ring, shot out and landed neatly in his hand. Let's move quickly, he called. With a graceful motion of the wand, he whispered the object transfer spell. One by one, the suitcases in the clearing floated upward, arranged themselves into a perfect row, and glided into the backpack, as though guided by an invisible hand. Urza and the others watched in astonishment. Lucian's magic wasn't the most destructive force on the battlefield, but its precision and artistry were undeniable. He could repair torn armor in an instant, clear debris with a flick, or, like now, organize heavy luggage at a distance. I'm not much of a fighter, Lucian admitted, securing the backpack on his shoulders. But I specialize in support magic. I hope that will be enough to help you all. He offered a modest smile. Facing these new enemies, far more formidable than any low-level wizards he'd encountered before, he had no intention of charging into the front lines. If he could bolster his allies from behind with well-timed spells, he'd consider that a victory in itself. You don't need to fight, Urza announced, her hand resting confidently on the breastplate of her armor. When the time comes, Natsu, Gray, Lucy, and I will handle every last enemy. Lucy's smile faltered. She wanted to tell Urza she wasn't nearly strong enough to fell a Vulcan gorilla with a single finger. But Urza's unwavering confidence robbed her of the words. Chapter 103, Top-Level Staff Body, First Order. When the group arrived at the station, Urza was already shouldering Lucian's backpack, so there was no need to ask the staff to store any luggage. Together with the 2 cats, the 4 mages, Urza, Gray, Natsu, and Lucy, boarded the train. Gray and Natsu sat side by side, with Happy wedged between them. Opposite them, Lucy and Urza took 2 seats, leaving the middle spot for Lucian. No sooner had the train begun to pull away than Natsu's buoyant mood collapsed. His trademark grin faded, replaced by a pained, queasy expression, as if he were about to be seasick. Lucian frowned in surprise. He'd heard of car sickness and seasickness, but train sickness? And from Natsu of all people, whose stamina was legendary? Lucy noticed Lucian's puzzled look and leaned toward him. What's wrong with him? Gray, unbothered, rummaged in his pack, pulled out a small dried fish and popped it into his mouth. Between chews, he explained, Natsu gets motion sick on every mode of transport. Trains, ships, carriages. Nothing spares him. He'll be like this until he adjusts. He shrugged, offering another fish to Natsu, as if feeding a particularly restless pet. After all, traveling alongside Natsu had long since taught him to expect this exact reaction. Want a piece, Lucian? Hobby dangled a strip of dried fish in front of him. Lucian shook his head. Trapped in a cat's body with a human soul, he never developed Hobby's fondness for such delicacies, and he certainly couldn't afford to pass out on any form of transport. Hobby looked disappointed, but Lucian didn't hesitate. He drew his wand from beneath his cloak and murmured, Wingardium Leviosa. Immediately, Natsu, still slumped in the carriage seat, began to rise, floating gently in midair. His tail swept the floor before curling around him. His claws stayed clear of the seat back. The moment he cleared the cushion, light returned to his golden eyes. Ha! I'm back, Natsu exclaimed, unleashing a plume of flame into the air. Thanks, Lucian. Lucian inclined his head. Just keep steady. With his upgraded wand, he could sustain the levitation spell for at least 30 minutes, plenty of time to get Natsu safely off at the next station. Natsu was one of their strongest fighters. If they ran into trouble en route, the last thing they could afford was a dragon who couldn't stand on his own 2 feet. Gray shifted in the saddle and called back to Urza. We're on the road already. What exactly is going on? Urza nodded, then settled into her story. A few days ago, I returned from a solo mission and was making my way back to the guild hall in Onibasi. I stopped at a tavern where mages often gather, hoping for news of new jobs. That's where I overheard several members of the Black Iron Forest Guild talking. She paused, her scarlet hair catching the late afternoon light. They spoke of locating the legendary cursed flute. Their plan is to break its seal and harness its deadly anti-curse power as part of some grand scheme. Lucian's eyes widened. He'd come across the cursed flute in an old grimoire at the library. According to folklore, the instrument was first forged to dispel the darkest curses. But centuries ago, Zareth, the black wizard of evil renown, had tampered with its magic, tainting its purpose. What remained was a flute capable of extinguishing curses, and perhaps much more dangerous magic. Gray exchanged a look with Lucian. So that's what we're after, Gray said. We need to stop them before they unleash whatever twisted power that flute holds. Lucian settled his cloak and urged his horse forward. Then let's move. The sooner we get that flute out of their hands, the better. Urza gave a curt nod. With their goal clear, the 3 of them spurred their mounts down the winding trail, racing toward the Black Iron Forest and the secret that awaited them there. The moment anyone hears the cursed flute's song, they fall under a death magic so potent it kills without warning, and its range spans entire battlefields. Yet Lucian's interest isn't in unleashing that lethal melody himself. With his current power, he couldn't hope to control such a weapon. More than decimating armies, what he really wants is the flute's wood. In the old arcane compendium he'd studied, the cursed flute was depicted as a thick, gnarled instrument, carved from dark timber, its head fashioned into a grinning skull. Lucian realized that, if he harvested even a section of that shaft and fashioned it into the body of his wand, its strength would skyrocket, especially for weaving curses like the Shen Feng Shadowless Curse. His existing wand, though imbued with potent cores, always felt lacking in resonance. A piece of this flute would change everything. That was why the royal demon hunters were on his trail. They'd learned of his possession of the illustrated guide. It wasn't the text alone, but the image of the flute that had drawn their attention. They would stop at nothing to reclaim or destroy it. Urza caught the shift in his expression and folded her arms, her violet eyes studying him. Lucian, you've been quiet. What's on your mind? He met her gaze and let out a slow breath. I read about the cursed flute in the library's compendium of arcane relics. It's more than a weapon. Its wood could make the perfect wand body. Urza frowned. You'd risk everything for that? He nodded, determination hardening his features. If it amplifies my curses, not even the demon legion can stand in my way. Chapter title: The Lullaby of the Cursed Flute. Lucian folded his arms, voice grave. The lullaby of the cursed flute is no ordinary relic. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could cost countless lives. Urza's expression hardened. I understand, Lucian. The Black Iron Forest is notorious for its ruthless dark mages. Assassinations, extortion, terror, name it, they've done it. If they've laid hands on the flute, there's no telling what atrocities they have planned. Lucy swallowed nervously. So, what do we do now? She glanced between Lucian and Urza, regret flickering in her eyes. This sounds way more dangerous than I imagined. Urza's jaw set in determination. We go straight to the Black Iron Forest's headquarters. We'll cut through their ranks, seize the flute, and put an end to their scheme before they can unleash its power. Lucy's heart pounded. Just like that? Take on an entire guild? Urza nodded. Yes, I considered a more subtle approach, but time isn't on our side. If the flute's magic is strong enough to become cursed, we can't wait for permission or reinforcement. We strike now, and we strike hard. Lucian took a deep breath. We'll need a plan of attack, scouting their defenses, neutralizing their sentries, and extracting the flute as quickly as possible. Urza, you lead the charge. Lucy and I will cover your flanks. Lucy's shoulders stiffened in resolve. All right, no turning back. As the three companions stepped into the gathering dusk, the silhouette of the Black Iron Forest's fortress loomed ahead, its dark spires cutting into the sky. Somewhere inside, the cursed flute awaited, and with it, the fate of countless innocents. They pressed forward, hearts steeled for the battle to come. Lucy's main concern was that, amid the chaos of battle, someone might slip away with the cursed flute. Better to regroup first. She hesitated, then called out, I'm going back to find Natsu and Gray. Gray's grin split his face. This is going to be fun. Natsu, practically radiating heat, punched his fist. Nothing beats smashing these guys. Lucy's response was less enthusiastic. She wiped sweat from her brow. A handful of assassins from the infamous Dark Magic Guild had dared to attack Fairy Tale's guild hall. The thought alone was enough to make her heart pound. Lucian stood beside her, calm and collected. If Urza, an S-class mage, had led them into this, she must have a plan. She wouldn't risk them all without confidence in victory. Originally, Urza believed that just she, Natsu, and Gray could handle the Black Iron Forest. With Lucy and Lucian now in the mix, their chances looked even better. Lucian offered Lucy a reassuring nod. He wasn't here simply to watch. When the fight turned critical, his magic and his hidden power would prove themselves indispensable. The train rattled north toward Onabasi, the remote frontier town behind the dreaded Black Iron Forest, while far away in Kroba City, Master Makarov sat presiding over the Guild Leaders' Union's routine session. The Grand Council chamber thrummed with the murmur of wizards arguing trade agreements and border patrols when, without warning, a streak of bright blue light darted through the stained glass window. Moments later, a small, sapphire-feathered bird alighted on Makarov's desk, its eyes gleaming with urgency. Nestled in its beak was a crisply folded parchment stamped with Mirajane's personal seal. "President Makarov! President Makarov!" the bird piped enthusiastically. A letter from Miss Mirajane. Makarov smiled to conceal his surprise. With a casual flourish, he summoned a pulse of arcane energy into the envelope. The wax seal glowed softly, then gave way, and an intricate runic circle blossomed across the parchment. As the glyphs dissolved, Makarov carefully unfolded the letter, and the hall fell silent, all eyes turning to see what urgent news the famed Mirajane could possibly bear. Chapter 104. The cat wants to drive within the magic circle. The phantom wrought by Mirajane's shadow magic shimmered into being. "Misters, thank you for attending our regular council meeting," Makarov announced proudly, gesturing at the luminous apparition of Mirajane. "Behold Fairy Tale's signature beauty. Truly breathtaking, isn't she?" The other guild masters exchanged approving nods as they admired Mirajane's gentle, graceful form. But their applause died on the spot when Mirajane's next words rang out across the chamber. While the guild master was away, something incredible happened back home. You'd hardly believe it, but Urza, Natsu, and Gray have teamed up. I believe it's the strongest party Fairy Tale has ever seen. A chill ran down Makarov's spine. Only a moment earlier, the president of the Four-Headed Hounds had warned him that Fairy Tale's wizards were a disaster waiting to happen, that they might one day level an entire city by accident, and he'd urged stricter supervision. Now, with Urza Scarlet, Natsu Dragneel, and Gray Fullbuster joining forces, accidental city destruction seemed all too plausible. Mirajane's words at last brought Makarov a wave of relief. She stood before the assembled council, the edges of her summoning circle fading into mist. "Lucian's repair magic has improved by leaps and bounds," she announced. "He can now restore even an entire hall in an instant. I asked him to accompany me today, and I wanted to make sure all of you knew." With that, the last traces of her circle vanished. As the chamber lights dimmed, Makarov's voice dropped to a fervent whisper. "Lucian, it's all up to you now," he muttered under his breath. From the other side of the long table, one of the guildmasters leaned forward, curiosity knitting his brows. "Fairy Tale boasts every manner of talent," he said, but we've never heard of repair magic on this scale. How is this possible? Makarov puffed out his chest with pride. Never heard of it? Well, you're looking at proof. Lucian's reputation was enough to silence the council's critics. With his skills, I no longer have to endure their constant nagging. A second elder, his white beard sweeping over his robes, stroked his chin thoughtfully. Perhaps what you call repair magic is actually the lost arc of time, he suggested. That ancient time spell, capable of rolling the world back to its former state or pushing it forward, could just as easily heal past damages or accelerate decay. It's said to be powerful enough to undo any wound, structure, or even the passage of events themselves. Makarov waved a hand dismissively. Arc of time or not, what matters is that we have the power to rebuild. And with Lucian on our side, Fairy Tale stands stronger than ever. It was useless against anything but plants. 3 hours later, the train screeched to a halt at Onibus Station. Lucian released the levitation spell, and Natsu collapsed to the platform with a soft thud. One by one, the others hopped down to join him, stretching stiff limbs as they stepped into the crowded station. Lucian turned to Urza. Do you know exactly where the Black Iron Forest Guild is hiding? Urza shook her head, her scarlet hair catching the station lights. No one's really sure. 6 years ago, the Guild Alliance expelled them and branded them a dark guild. Their old headquarters was abandoned, and since then they've been on the move. We don't even know if they're still in Onibus. Lucy and Happy exchanged a worried glance. So finding them here is like hunting for a needle in a haystack. Lucy groaned. Urza cracked a half-smile. Doesn't matter. All we need to do is grab one of their mages, rough him up, and we'll get the location straight out of him. Gray pinched the bridge of his nose. Sounds simple, but first we'd have to know which mage to target. Thousands of wizards in this city. How do we pick out a Black Iron Forest member? Lucian stepped forward. Actually, I've been working on a bit of trace magic. If their guild branding leaves even a faint aura behind, I can zero in on. Urza eyed him thoughtfully, then nodded. Show us, Lucian. Let's see if your magic can cut through the noise. As long as you give me a person's name, I can pinpoint their location. Lucian didn't want to waste time wandering around looking for someone, so he volunteered readily. That's precisely why understanding a name matters. Urza's eyes lit up. Before Lucian could brace himself, she swept him up in a fierce hug. You're amazing, Lucian. His head thumped against her polished breastplate. Ouch, he silently vowed from now on to keep Urza's armor and her hugs at arm's length. He'd much rather be in Mirajine's softer embrace. Clearing his head, Lucian turned back to their task. I don't know the individual mages' names in the Black Iron Forest, he admitted, rubbing his temple, but there is one who's notorious. Eligor. Urza straightened, excitement bubbling in her crimson eyes. Eligor is the head of the Black Iron Forest Guild, and its deadliest assassin mage. He's never botched a contract. They call him the God of Death. A name is all we need. Lucian pulled his slender wand from his pack and pointed it toward the city's edge. Eligor, locate. A faint glow coalesced at the tip of his wand and shot forward as a golden arrow hovering midair. It pointed away from the city, to the dense woodlands beyond the walls. Lucy, standing nearby, couldn't hide her admiration. Lucian, you know so much magic, she said, enviously eyeing the shimmering tracer. Lucian tucked his wand away. Then let's move, he said. We've got our target. Lucian gave a wry smile. I don't have your strength, beating a Vulcan gorilla with a single finger, so I'll only slow you down. Lucy's cheeks flushed. I told you it was just a rumor. She tapped the glowing arrow fletched to her bow. This reading shows the Black Iron Forest lies beyond Onibus City's walls. Maybe well beyond. We should rent a magic carriage. It'll get us there faster and keep us safe. Gray nodded in agreement. If the forest really is just outside the city, we could walk there in an hour or two, but if we miss it, we'll be wandering for days, and Eligor might not even be listed in the guild's records. Speed matters. Lucian approved of Gray's logic, far more reliable than the hot-headed duo of Natsu and Urza. Not me, Natsu declared. I refuse to ride in any carriage. Urza rolled her eyes, delivered a quick punch, and sent Natsu sprawling. Objection overruled. We're renting the carriage. You'll meet us outside the station. A few minutes later, Urza returned at the wheel of a sleek, emerald-green magic carriage. Lucian, Lucy, Gray, and a grumbling Natsu climbed aboard, ready to race toward the black iron forest. Lucian stared at the gleaming green vehicle before him, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Is this a magic car?" he asked. In their world, nearly every tool and weapon was powered by arcane energy. Firearms, cannons, even everyday items ran on mana instead of gasoline or electricity. Magic cars were no exception. Beneath that polished exterior lay a simple design, a front cockpit much like an old coach, equipped with a joystick, throttle lever, and brake pedal, while the rear cabin held comfortable seats for passengers. The only truly arcane component was the binding bracelet, inscribed with runes and worn on the driver's wrist to channel magical power into the engine. "Get in quickly," Urza urged, beckoning them forward. "We have no idea what Eligor plans to do with the cursed flute, but it won't be good. We need to catch him before he uses it." Lucian hesitated for only a moment before shaking his head. "Urza, I should drive." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You? This car devours mana like nothing else. My reserves are the only ones strong enough to keep it running at full speed." He met her gaze steadily. "I've been honing my mana control with Lady Aveline's guidance. Besides, you'll need your energy for protective wards and combat spells once we catch up to him." For a heartbeat, Urza studied Lucian's determined expression. Then she stepped aside and held out the rune-carved bracelet. "All right, Lucian, just don't overstrain yourself." Sliding the bracelet onto his wrist, Lucian felt the familiar surge of power at his fingertips. He gripped the joystick, drew a steady breath, and nodded to the others. Tires humming with magical force, the green car lifted slightly off the cobblestones and shot forward, racing toward whatever danger awaited them and toward Eligor's dark secret. Chapter 105, The Raging Cat, Update 1. Lucian refused to back down. "Urza, you're fairy tale's strongest. We need you conserving your magic. If you burn through it tracking the Iron Forest Guild, we'll be in real trouble later." Urza drew herself up, confidence in her eyes. "Relax, Lucian. Even if my magic runs dry, I can still fight with this staff. Plus, Natsu and Gray are right here." Natsu inhaled deeply and sent a fountain of flames shooting into the sky, grinning ear to ear. "Ha! I'm the fiercest mage in fairy tale. No one can stand against me, especially not the Iron Forest Guild." Gray flung open his coat to reveal absurdly defined abs. "Give it a rest, Firebrain. I'm the real powerhouse around here." Urza rolled her eyes, snapped off the communicator on her wrist, and leapt out of the van. With a single motion, she landed 2 precise punches, one to Natsu, one to Gray, sending both flying into the dirt. "Focus, you two," she said, dusting off her skirt. "This isn't the time for your nonsense. We've got a guild to take down." Lucian seized the moment and leapt into the driver's seat. "Actually, my raw strength may be limited," he said, "but my mana regenerates almost instantly. If anything goes wrong, you can always swap in someone else." Lucy crossed her arms. "But Lucian, even if you can channel magic, you still can't drive. Your paws can't reach the joystick or press the brake." A confident gleam sparked in Lucian's amber eyes. "Don't worry about it." Tracing an arcane symbol in the air, he summoned a faintly glowing magic circle above his head. As a pureblood wizard, his mana was effectively inexhaustible, and in a heartbeat, his form swelled. The sleek little cat shot up to the size of a tiger, his golden fur bristling with power. Now towering over the console, Lucian padded over to the driver's seat and settled in. He slipped the enchanted bracelet onto his massive foreleg, placed his broad paws on the steering wheel, and stretched his hind legs down to the accelerator and brake. With everything finally within reach, he gave Lucy a triumphant wink. "All set." Lucy stared at Lucian's transformed form, then glanced over at Happy, still perched on Natsu's shoulder, happily munching a fish, and couldn't help whispering, "Happy, you're both cats. So why does his transformation look so much more impressive?" Nearby, Happy overheard. She looked first at Urza, then back at Lucy, and said pointedly, "Lucy, she's a skilled female mage just like you. Why such a huge difference?" Lucy's cheeks burned. She snapped, "Enough. Let's go." With that, Urza, Natsu, Gray, Happy, and Lucy piled into the magically powered car. Lucian floored the accelerator, and the vehicle leapt forward in a flash of emerald light, shrinking almost to a distant green dot. Racing through another world felt even more thrilling than he'd imagined. Up ahead loomed a tight hairpin turn. Lucian swung the wheel, and the car drifted smoothly around the bend, leaving a surprised horse-drawn carriage in its wake. The stunned driver rubbed his eyes and muttered, Did that big cat just speed past me?" From the trunk, Urza's head popped out. "Lucian, can your magic really handle this speed?" Lucian gave a confident wag of his tail. He'd never felt more alive. Racing, he decided, was something he could do for the rest of his life. Half an hour later, just outside Gunuka's station, a squad of armored soldiers thrust up their halberds, forcing Lucian's carriage to an abrupt halt. Lucian, rushing toward the station, skidded to a stop, startled by the sudden blockade. "Hold this vehicle for inspection," one of the soldiers barked. Without hesitation, Urza sprang down from the carriage and held out her fairy tale guild crest. The squad leader scanned her magical tattoo, then bowed deeply. "Our apologies," he said. "Mages from the Dark Guild Black Iron Forest hijacked a train here. We're conducting routine security checks." With the inspection complete, the magic train rumbled back to life. The party climbed aboard once more, trading theories about Black Iron Forest's plans. Though the enchanted locomotive could only travel along fixed rails, it outpaced any ordinary carriage by far and could carry dozens of passengers at once. Everyone agreed that the Dark Guild must be using it to transport the cursed flute to the next city on the line. Their hunch proved correct. Lucian's directional arrow continued to point straight down the track. They passed through Gunukus and the city of Ohibana, and before long, the spires of Kroba appeared on the horizon. "Got it!" Lucian exclaimed. Just outside Kroba City, they came upon a deserted train stalled on the tracks. The cars were empty, no sign of the Black Iron Forest wizard anywhere. Urza's brow furrowed. "They're not really after the train. Their target is Kroba City." Lucian's face went solemn. "Exactly. The Mage Guild president and his council always hold their regular meeting here." Lucy gasped. "You're not saying they're aiming for our president?" Gray's voice turned ice cold. "It's worse. They intend to curse every guild president at once with the cursed flute. If it succeeds, they'll all die simultaneously." Urza pressed a hand against the train's still warm wheel. "Their engines barely cooled. Lucian, keep up your tracking spell. If we don't stop them here, they'll reach the council before we can warn anyone. I'm with Fairy Tale, so I won't back down." Lucian murmured the final words of his tracking spell, and the enchanted car leapt forward with a roar. Its headlights cut through the dusk as he pursued the Black Iron Forest wizards across Kroba City's winding streets. At last, around a dimly lit corner, they found their prey, Eligor and his henchmen, regrouping beneath the flickering glow of a street lamp. Lucian slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt, tires kicking up sparks against the cobblestones. He and 4 other mages spilled onto the road, forming a tight half-circle around the menacing figure at the center. "Eligor," Lucian called, voice low but unwavering. "Hand over the cursed flute. Don't make this any harder than it needs to be." Eligor, a towering man with a scythed staff in hand, bare-chested save for the bandages wrapped around his forearms, sneered. "Who are you to stop me?" he growled, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the newcomers. In an instant, the tension snapped. From the shadows emerged a red-haired woman in armor, her sword gleaming, Urza Scarlet of Fairy Tale. Next came a wild-haired youth cloaked in flames, Natsu Dragneel, followed by the steely-eyed Grey Fullbuster. Beside them stood Lucy Heartfilia, keys jingling at her belt, and the sky-blue Exceed, happy, fluttering on tiny wings. Finally, Lucian stepped forward, heart-pounding. "Lucian," the others chorused, stamping their determination into the night air. A spark of exhilaration flared inside Lucian, his first real moment as a fairy tale wizard. He clenched his fists, ready to claim his place among these legends. But he quelled the impulse with a steadying breath. Overzealous declarations about bonds and destiny weren't his style. He was a mage who let his spells speak for him. "Enough talk," Lucian said, voice calm and collected. "Drop your flute, Eligor. Fairy Tale doesn't negotiate with dark wizards." Eligor's confident smirk faltered as he gripped his scythe more tightly. The showdown had begun. "I'm happy to report that our first batch of orders topped 1,600. Thank you all for your incredible support. Honestly, this exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. I had been aiming for 2,000 returning readers and was already thrilled at 1,500, so hitting over 1,600 on our very first release is fantastic." As promised, I'll be posting 5 new chapters today. Let's keep the momentum going. Chapter 106, Armor of the Wind God, second update. Regaining his normal stature and stretching his wings, Lucian shot into the air. Before Eligor could utter a single word, he cast a megaphone spell, his voice booming across the courtyard. Attention, all members of Fairy Tale. These intruders belong to the dark guild Black Iron Forest. They're planning to unleash a curse on the guild president's meeting nearby, using a dark magic device called the Curse Flute. This area is no longer safe. Evacuate immediately. Alert the military and warn the guild presidents at once. Lucian knew that the priority wasn't to charge into battle, but to clear the civilians out of harm's way and give the authorities time to respond. Once the nearby police and army were notified, they could investigate and contain the threat. He trusted that the guild presidents, most of whom were S-rank wizards skilled in counter curses, would be able to defend themselves, provided they weren't taken off guard. With any luck, they'd arrive before the curse flute could be unleashed. Eligor suspected that a grand curse like this wouldn't succeed even as a surprise assault. If it were truly that powerful, it wouldn't have been sealed so easily years ago. The blast shook the city to its foundations, and the curious onlookers who'd gathered nearby scattered in terror. Within seconds, the streets lay deserted. To ordinary folk, a dark wizard was the very embodiment of death. Every year, countless innocents perished in their battles, a grim fact dutifully reported in every magic journal. Before Lucian could react, the cat familiar at his side let out a startled yowl, its cry even rousing the coiled serpent at his feet. Eligor would not tolerate another warning. He swung his rusted sickle, unleashing a razor-sharp wave of emerald wind that tore upward toward Lucian. Instinctively, Lucian braced himself to dodge, only to see Urza leap between them. In one fluid motion, she raised her sword and shattered the windblade into brittle fragments, which tinkled harmlessly to the cobblestones below. Urza's eyes blazed with righteous fury. A swarm of flies, daring to spoil my good work? Stop them, and I will curse every guild president who stands in our way. Eligor, the guildmaster, knew better than to underestimate the Fairy Queen. With a sharp command, he marshaled hundreds of his wizards in a tight phalanx, then swept upward on a gust of wind, the cursed flute clutched in one hand. His plan was clear. Reach the northern villa before any interference, raise the flute to his lips, and unleash its dark enervation spell on the unsuspecting guild leaders below. Kill them, he barked. At his signal, the wizards hurled spell after spell at Urza and her companions. Brilliant bolts of energy crackled through the air, pinning them back. Urza spat out a curse, barely managing to deflect a lance of violet fire. For a tense moment, it seemed they might be overwhelmed. Then Lucian moved. Quietly, without fanfare, he spread his obsidian-black wings and surged forward, his robes billowing like storm clouds around him. From his fingertips danced a ruby glow. "You turn your back on me," he murmured, voice calm but deadly, "so I'll show no mercy." He swirled his wand in a graceful arc, once, twice, and released. "Disarm!" A beam of crimson light lanced out, striking Eligor squarely in the chest. In an instant, the cursed flute and the gleaming sickle were wrenched from his grasp, tumbling through the sky. Before he could snatch them back, Lucian's voice rang out again. "Come to me." Obliging as though drawn by an invisible string, the flute spun through the air and snapped into Lucian's waiting hand. In that same heartbeat, one fell swoop of his wand sent the sickle clattering to the ground below, out of reach. Eligor hovered there, stunned and weaponless, as Lucian folded his wings and descended between him and the retreating wizards. Behind him, Urza and the others regrouped, renewed hope shining in their eyes. "Is that enough courtesy for you?" Lucian asked softly, his gaze knee, relieving the guild masters. Then, with the cursed flute secure at his side, he turned back to join the battle, this time on his own terms. Eligor staggered backward, clutching his sickle in disbelief. "Damn it, I was careless." He'd never imagined he could be bested by a cat. "Give me back that cursed flute," he snarled. With a whirlwind of motion, Eligor unleashed several razor-sharp gusts of wind, each one slicing hungrily through the air as he gave chase. Lucian relied on his larger frame to twist and pivot out of reach, every blade whooshing past harmlessly. He didn't even bother fighting back, His earlier success had come only because Eligor had let his guard down. Under normal circumstances, the speed and precision of wind magic made it trivial to dodge conventional spells. Lucian weighed his options. He could call upon the Shadowless spell, his ultimate trump card, capable of striking with no visible warning. But if he failed to finish Eligor now, the Sorcerer would anticipate its use next time. Even though the Shadowless spell left no arcane residue, a perceptive foe could still read the subtle motion of his wand arm and prepare to evade. Better to keep that secret hidden until the decisive moment. So Lucian continued to dance away from each gust, his breathing steady. He would draw Eligor further from his defensive comfort, force him to waste energy, and wait for the precise instant to turn the tables. After all, patience was as potent a weapon as any spell. Only when someone can cast the Shadowless spell without a wand, or even a whisper, can their mastery truly be called flawless. Well done, Lucian. Get behind me. I'll handle this. Urza's eyes sparkled when she saw Lucian seize the cursed flute. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she transformed her magic sword into a spear of pure energy and sent more than a dozen enemy mages sprawling. Lucian made no move to intervene. With an S-rank wizard like Urza in front, he was content to hang back, ready to support and spring a surprise attack when the moment was right. "On your knees," he called, unleashing a crackling azure beam at Eligor. The dark sorcerer staggered, forced to slow his advance and scramble for cover. Spinning on his heel, Eligor darted behind Urza, taking position alongside Lucian happy. "All right," he sneered, "today I'll finally meet the so-called Fairy Queen in person." But once he dodged Lucian's blast, Eligor realized that Urza had already stepped between him and the flute. He knew full well that unless he could eliminate her, reclaiming the cursed instrument would be impossible. As president of the Black Iron Forest and an S-rank wizard himself, he had no intention of holding back any longer. Storm Wave! Eligor's right hand traced a swift sigil in the air, violet light coalescing into a miniature tornado hurtling straight toward Urza. A wind mage, he mused, confident that such an assault would strike terror in his opponent. But Urza didn't flinch. With a calm exhale, she invoked her night magic. A crimson magic circle flared around her, and in an instant her usual armor and spear dissolved into rippling arcane energy. The wind at her command wove around her form, reshaping her attire. Small, feathery wings sprouted at her temples, her hair was swept up into a high, flowing knot, and her heavy plate armor became a light tribal robe intricately stitched with swirling cloud and wind runes. Where her spear had been stood, a slender longsword, its guard curling like a drifting cloud. "Armor of the wind god," she intoned, her voice as steady as the breeze itself. From his hiding spot behind a shattered pillar, Lucian watched with fascination. Most mages who used dress-up magic merely plucked pre-prepared weapons from their personal spellfold to fight. But Urza's transformation was different. Her very armor and weapon were forged anew in the whirlwind of her magic, an artistry far beyond the ordinary. As the tornado slammed into her shimmering robe, Urza simply sidestepped with the grace of a dancer, the loud-shaped blade humming in her hand. Lucian's pulse quickened. He'd come to this battle expecting fireworks, but Urza's display of power was something else entirely. And he knew, in that moment, that facing her would be unlike anything he'd ever encountered. For Lucian, this was little different from pulling a prearranged weapon out of his traceless extension backpack. At most, the process was a bit quicker. After all, with his magnetic control, he wasn't exactly slow. Urza, however, operated on a completely different level. She could summon not only magic weapons, but full enchanted armor in an instant, and it snapped onto her body the moment it appeared. Her hairstyle even shifted to match the new armor set. If Lucian tried to fetch his armor from his pack, strip off his clothes, and suit up, it would easily take a minute or two, especially since ordinary armor is notoriously cumbersome to put on. Chapter 107. Star Spirit Magic. Lucian was a mage, not a swordsman, but that didn't mean he could afford to wander the battlefield unprotected. No matter which world he found himself in, a high-defense suit of armor he could summon at a moment's notice was a lifesaver. He'd mastered a spell that cloaked him in a sturdy shell whenever danger loomed, enough to shrug off stray arrows or absorb a blast of fire. Still, today his thoughts drifted to another lesson in spatial magic. The difference between carving out a pocket dimension by personal will and casting the so-called traceless expansion spell. Each method had its merits and its limitations. With a self-wrought pocket dimension, all Lucian needed was his own mana. He could slip items, or even a single companion, into a compact, secure realm that existed purely in his mind. It was always at hand and impossible for others to detect. But its size was necessarily small. He could store a few potions, some scrolls, maybe a spare robe, but no more. By contrast, traceless expansion could magnify any physical medium into vast invisible spaces, warehouses, stables, even the size of a small town. You could stow entire herds of sheep or a company of soldiers inside what appeared to be an ordinary chest. The trick, however, was maintaining the anchor item itself. Lose the chest, and the entire inner world collapsed. Moreover, if you expanded your space to city scale, retrieving a single dagger could become an expedition of its own. Even with a flight spell to bridge the gap, it took precious seconds to reach the hidden doorway. Lucian smiled to himself. Magic, he reminded his fellow scholars, was always a matter of trade-offs. Defense or firepower, size or speed, convenience or capacity. You chose your advantage and accepted the rest. And in his book, having both an armored shell at the ready and a pair of spatial spells in his repertoire, made him as prepared as any adventurer could hope to be. Lucian knew right away that forging a true space storage ring out of solid metal was a dead end. If it were possible, he wouldn't have to haul around a cumbersome box. He could simply slip on a ring or a bracelet and calmly stroll through customs without a second thought. Even carving a hidden compartment into the ring itself wouldn't solve the core problem. The real trick lies in the traceless extension spell, which simply stretches existing magical space. The bigger the original pocket of space, the easier it is to expand. The smaller it is, the harder. And if you make the entryway too narrow, it's a nuisance to get things in and out. That's the limitation of the dress-changing knight's magic. The total volume depends entirely on the user's personal mana reserves. Even for an S-rank mage like Urza, the pocket dimension she controls isn't vast. It can't hold living creatures and is really only big enough to stash a couple of weapons. It can't store anything with a living aura. Only inanimate objects will stay put. Still, the advantages are compelling. No one else can snatch away your enchanted pouch, and whatever you hide inside can be summoned instantly whenever you need it. If you transplanted this magic into the world of Harry Potter, you'd never have to worry about ministry inspectors catching you red-handed. Lucian sighed as he tucked away his wand. In the Harry Potter world, the trace-free extension charm was strictly regulated. Private practice was forbidden. Looks like I'll have to find time to learn it from Urza, he muttered to himself. I just hope she's willing to teach me. He glanced toward the library stacks. Plenty of tomes covered basic dress-changing magic, all of which an ambitious student could tackle on their own. But Urza's specialized armored transformation, spells? No copies in sight. She developed those herself. Across the room, Lucy's eyes lit up. Urza stood before them, her usual imposing armor dissolving into thin air. In its place was a pale blue dress trimmed with tiny, upturned wings on the shoulders, a head-to-toe switch from her normal no-nonsense knight regalia. The contrast between Urza's stern command presence and this almost fairy-tale ensemble was impossible not to adore. Happy leaned against a shelf, brimming with smug satisfaction. That's the Wind God armor, paired with the Wind God sword, he announced. If Eligor shows up, she won't know what hit her. Lucian frowned at the unfamiliar names. Wind God armor? Wind God sword? What do they actually do? Happy grinned, tossing a strand of hair behind his ear. The armor is enchanted to disperse wind-based spells, practically makes her immune to air magic. The sword channels that same elemental force, carving through foes with slicing gusts. Lucy shot Lucian a knowing look. Sounds like a handy trick to have in your back pocket. He nodded, expression serious. First things first. I need to master that trace-free extension charm. Without it, I'd never be able to summon or wear gear like this. Now to convince Urza to give me a lesson. Urza felt the wind magic slashing toward her grow even stronger, at least half as powerful as her own. Clutching the Wind God sword, a legendary blade brimming with tempestuous magic, she called out, Unleash it. Within moments, she'd shed her bulky coat and lunged at the gathering tornado. With a single fierce swing, her sword erupted in gale force magic, tearing the vortex apart like paper. Before the fragments of wind could regroup, Urza was already streaking toward Eligor, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Eligor slammed his sickle into the ground to brace himself, but his skills at close quarters paled beside Urza's honed blade work. She pressed him relentlessly. Thrust, slash, rip, driving him from the air down onto the forest floor. Each time he tried to leap up and reclaim the skies, she forced him back, her assault never letting up. Everyone's giving it their all, Urza panted, eyes blazing. I won't be the weak link. Across the battlefield, Natsu and Gray kept the Black Iron Forest's dark mages at bay, their combined spells holding firm. Lucian, formerly called George, snatched back the cursed flute from one staggering foe. At his side, Lucy felt her confidence surge. She drew a golden key from her pouch and began to chant, her voice steady. Open, Gate of Cancer, Caesar. A brilliant blue magic circle spiraled into existence around her. The air rippled, and then with a soft pop, a figure stepped through, a sharply dressed man, trendy haircut held fast by a single hair clipper and a pair of gleaming crab claws attached to his back. He cracked a confident smile as he folded his arms, ready for the fight to come. Celestial magic, pass! Lucian watched with mild curiosity as Lucy completed the celestial incantation, but he had no intention of learning it himself, at least not right now. Celestial magic wasn't weak. A sufficiently powerful summoned spirit could turn the tide of any battle. Still, Lucian's priority was spells that worked reliably across multiple worlds. In neither the Marvel Universe nor the realm of Harry Potter did celestial keys or an entire celestial world exist. Outside this world, summoning star spirits would be useless. That said, there was undeniable value in the principles behind celestial magic. If he ever mastered its core essence, it would prove immensely useful down the road. For now, though, with his current magic level, it made far more sense to focus on practical, life-saving spells. There would be plenty of time to pursue celestial arts once he became a fully fledged mage. Caesar, take care of them, Lucy called out as a squad of Black Iron Forest wizards slipped past Natsu and Gray, intent on reclaiming the cursed flute. With a graceful flick of her wrist, she issued her next command to her summoned Cancer Star Spirit. Shrimp, time for a makeover, the Cancer Star Spirit cried, darting forward in a flash. In mere seconds, the spirit snipped away each wizard's weapons with its twin razor-sharp hair clippers, then scissored their hair into ridiculous kappa top knots. Pathetic, it jeered, tossing aside the shat, red arms like broken toys. On the other side of the battlefield, Eligor's eyes widened in alarm as Urza's wind god sword shredded his stormcoat barrier into scrap. His seasoned troops were falling fast, and unless he acted now, their entire plan would collapse. Yet Eligor didn't notice Lucian. Silent as a shadow, slipped behind him the moment Urza's blade broke through. Storm smash! Lucian roared, unleashing a tempest of razor-edged wind blades that struck Urza squarely, forcing her to stagger backward. Seizing the opening, Eligor rose into the air, crossing his arms. 6 violet magic circles ignited around him, each pulsing with dark, crackling energy. The air hummed with power as he prepared to unleash his full strength and turn the tide of battle in his favor. Go to hell! Take my strongest spell, Emerald Swift! Lucian poured half his magic reserves into the incantation. 6 spiraling storms erupted from the runic circle at his feet, converging above him into a massive, twisting drill of wind and raw power. The air whined with energy as that colossal vortex lunged straight for Urza, powerful enough, he was sure, to punch clean through a 100-meter-tall mountain. But Urza didn't flinch. With a calm breath, she invoked her night magic. Vajra armor! In an instant, cerulean and white diamond plates materialized around her, forming the wind god armor. The twin wind god swords in her hands melted away, replaced by 2 enormous shields that gleamed with prismatic light. Raising them before her, she planted her feet firmly on the ground, prepared to withstand Lucian's ultimate assault. Chapter 108, Cat Laoliu's Sneak Attack, 4th Update. Diamond Barrier. 2 colossal shields of emerald magic surged forward and united, forming an airtight cocoon around Urza. The Storm Drill, a vortex of raw power that could bore through hills, pummeled the barrier like water against a dam. Its force ebbed instantly, dissipating until it was little more than a feeble breeze. How can it be so strong? Eligor's voice trembled as he stared at the unyielding wall of gemstone light. He had poured every ounce of his might into that attack, yet the Fairy Queen stood unscathed and serene. He ground his teeth. Prolonging this duel would only spell defeat. Urza's poise and power far outmatched his own, but he cared nothing for defeating her. His true objective lay elsewhere: reclaim the cursed flute and storm the Northern City Council meeting hall, where he would unleash its haunting melody upon the unsuspecting dignitaries. All he needed was a moment's distraction, just long enough to snatch the flute from the tiny, ant-sized kitten clutching it and vanish into the shadows. Magic wind wall. With a guttural exhalation, Eligor drew the last of his mana into a swirling blast of razor-sharp gusts and hurled it at Urza. The air around him crackled as wind blades shot forward, eager to slice through her barrier and clear his path to the prize. But even as the whirlwind formed, Urza's calm blue eyes narrowed. The next moment, the kitten at her side, Cat Laolu, arched her back and tensed for action. The true sneak attack was about to begin. This was neither an offensive nor a defensive spell, but a trap. Lucian conjured a high-speed vortex that formed an unbreakable barrier around his opponent. Even a stronger wizard would be trapped until its magic dissipated. As soon as Eligor completed the whirlwind wall, his mana was utterly drained and his concentration faltered. Sensing the opening, Lucian struck. From the blind spot behind Eligor, a translucent blade sliced through the air. God's Edge without shadow. Lucian, the sixth member of their order, announced as he unleashed his spell. Eligor, famed assassin with razor-sharp instincts, realized too late that something was wrong. He tried to summon his Stormcoat defense, but his reserves hadn't recovered from casting his ultimate. Whirling around to evade, he saw nothing, and in that heartbeat of confusion, the blade found its mark. Before he could register what was happening, his head separated from his shoulders. Lucian stood over the fallen figure of Eligor, a cold satisfaction curling at the corner of his mouth. "So I actually died by your hand." The dark mage had gasped moments before, his last words trailing into the wind. But Lucian was no gentleman. His revenge was swift and absolute. With Eligor's death, the shimmering barrier of wind magic flickered and collapsed. Through the dissipating vortex strode Urza, her dual armor melting away like liquid steel to reveal the familiar breastplate and greaves she wore every day. She approached the headless corpse, sword tip resting lightly on the grass, and let out a soft sigh. "You were formidable," she said quietly. "A pity you chose such a dark path." Urza then turned to Lucian, admiration shining in her eyes. "Your spellwork, flawlessly executed." At her signal, the battlefield roared to life. "Roar of the fire dragon," Urza cried, unleashing a torrent of crimson flame that swept across the clearing. "Ice shape, Lancer," she added, and crystalline spears of frost exploded outward, impaling the remaining black iron forest wizards. Natsu and Gray, standing by her side, answered in kind. Natsu's voice thundered, "Rathalos Inferno," as fiery devastation engulfed their foes. Gray shaped his ice into a formation of lances with a sharp freeze, Lancer formation. Together, the three unleashed a cataclysm of flame and frost that shattered every last dark spell the enemy had cast. In the aftermath, the distant clatter of armor heralded the arrival of reinforcements. Villagers, soldiers, and even the guild presidents, ripped from their meeting by urgent summons, rushed into the clearing. They found Lucian, Urza, Natsu, and Gray standing amid scorched earth and shattered magic, the battlefield finally at peace. When they arrived on the scene, the southern quarter lay in ruins. Fallen black iron forest wizards were strewn across the shattered streets, and barely a building stood intact. Makarov leaned against a battered wall, chest heaving. "It's all right. Lucian's here. He can fix this," he gasped, more to steady himself than to reassure anyone else. If he hadn't known Lucian's power for restoration, he would have fainted at the devastation. Instead, he watched as Lucian knelt amid the rubble, inspecting the dark wood in his hand, a cursed flute, humming with suppressed magic. Lucian traced his fingers along its length. "This is a remarkable core," he said softly. "You can feel the raw mana pulsing through it. Carved into a wand, it'll rival any artisan's finest work." After delivering the final blow to Eligor, Lucian drew a slender blade from his pack. He intended to carve a small section of the flute's wood for his new wand core before the kingdom's army and the guild presidents arrived. If anyone questioned the damage, he'd simply explain that it happened in the chaos of battle. With a steady hand, he began to slice. Lucian stood atop the shattered battlements, the cursed flute clenched in his hand. He'd wrested it from the dark wizard Eligor, making it his prize. If the Mage Council insisted on reclaiming it, he'd oblige, though they would receive nothing but a broken, powerless instrument as proof of its ruin. He was about to turn and leave when the skull carved into the flute's mouthpiece flared with an eerie purple glow. A raspy, malevolent voice rasped from the hollow wood. "Fools! These so-called wizards are worthless. Never mind. I will do this myself. I will harvest every human soul in this city." In an instant, a magic circle large enough to blank out half the skyline inked itself into the air above him. Lucian's grip loosened, and the flute vanished. Where it had been, a monstrous figure now loomed, a three-eyed demon, at least 100 meters tall, descending through the circle and cracking the pavement beneath its feet. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The cursed flute's true form is a demon! Urza, Natsu, and the others hurried forward to stand beside Lucian. For a moment, he simply watched the demon's enormous silhouette, stunned. He slid his dagger back into its sheath. He'd never imagined the flute could transform like this, and certainly not into something so colossally terrifying. Urza drew herself up, meeting his wide-eyed stare. "Stay calm," she said firmly. "We've faced worse odds than this. Together we'll bring it down. For the glory of the kingdom, archers loose, cavalry charge!" The shrill blast of the horn shattered the morning stillness. In an instant, a torrent of arrows blackened the sky, and gleaming lances of armored cavalry thundered down the main street toward the three-eyed demon towering over the square. Lucian stood beside Urza on the city wall, watching in mounting horror as arrows pinged harmlessly off the demon's scaly hide. The creature's three crimson eyes locked onto the human ranks with haughty amusement. "You pitiful mortals," it boomed, its voice shaking the rooftops. "How dare you threaten me? I will claim your souls." With a roar, the demon raised both arms, conjuring a colossal orb of crackling violet energy between its palms. Lucian's pulse raced. He recognized that surge of magic. It was at least 10 times more powerful than Eli Gore's ultimate spell from moments before. One direct hit would vaporize the charging knights in an instant. "No, Gray," Urza yelled, yanking the reins of her warhorse. But the cavalry pressed on blindly, steel glinting under the demon's baleful gaze. Lucian's jaw clenched. Ordinary soldiers stood no chance against such raw power. If someone didn't act fast, the entire kingdom army would be wiped from the field and the city would fall. Urza's hand shot out, seizing Gray and hurling him forward with incredible force. Under her power, he shot like a rocket toward the three-eyed demon and the kingdom's army. "Ice make! Ice shield!" Gray roared, materializing a massive barrier of ice that took the full brunt of the demon's energy cannon blast. At the same moment, Natsu's right fist ignited in Dragon Slayer flames. Using the surge of heat, he rocketed 100 meters into the air, and with a roar, drove his blazing gauntlet straight into the demon's face. The impact staggered their foe, extinguishing the energy cannon mid-charge. Urza wasn't finished. "Requip, heavenly wheel armor," she commanded. In an instant, her current armor dissolved and reformed into a gleaming new suit, 4 steel wings fanning out behind her like those of an angel. Chapter 109, The True Strength of an S-Class Mage. Lucian gazed at Urza as she donned her new heavenly armor, a low whistle escaping his lips. The gleaming plates fanned out over her shoulders like ethereal wings, while filigreed greaves and a scarcely-there breast guard accentuated her figure, equal parts sanctified and seductive. Even as the cursed flute flared to life and twisted into a hulking three-eyed demon, Lucian felt no panic. At that moment, Makarov and the other guild masters descended among them, moving with the calm assurance of seasoned veterans rather than alarmed bystanders. From their elevated vantage point, the S-Class mages and guild presidents watched the confrontation with measured interest, exchanging critiques as though witnessing a sparring match between champions. No one stiffened. Instead, one of the more loquacious masters leaned toward Lucy, recounting tales of Zeref, the malevolent architect of the cursed flute, and his dark achievements. Their composed demeanor made one thing clear. However fearsome this demon might be, it was nothing these S-class legends could not handle. With Makarov and the Holy Ten leading them, Fairy Tail's finest were more than ready for the true test of their strength. Lucian knew the cursed flute's abilities, inside and out, so he remained unshaken. Even if the flute's curse-dispelling technique activated, it couldn't touch these master mages. He was certain they'd learned how to break its dark magic. "Take to the skies, swordsman," he called out. In an instant, Urza, clad in the Heavenwheel armor, soared aloft. Dozens of enchanted blades began to spin around her, forming a deadly tornado that shredded the three-eyed demon to pieces. Lucian's breath caught. Is this the true power of an S-class mage? At the same time, Natsu's roaring fire blasts and Gray's razor-sharp ice spikes pounded the creature from every angle, puncturing its massive body with gaping wounds. Lucian realized, for the first time, that in all their encounters with the Black Iron Forest Guild, none of them had ever tapped into their full power. "Well, Lucian," Makarov said with a grin, rubbing his hands as he stepped up beside him, "now the hard part falls to you." Lucian shook off his surprise and glanced around. The city lay in near-total ruin, buildings collapsed, streets cracked, and ash drifting on the wind. There was no turning back. It was his moment to act. Lucian couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. Even with the powerful super wand, restoring such a vast area would take quite some time. "President," he teased, "are you trying to wear this old cat out?" Makarov laughed heartily. "What nonsense. Take your time. Work one day, rest one day. So long as the city gets rebuilt, I'm happy." He reached out, tapped Lucian gently on the shoulder with 2 fingers, and offered a warm smile. Lucian rolled his eyes but returned the grin. "If the president says so, then as the guild's wizard, I have no excuse to slack off. I'll skip the days off and finish this as fast as I can." He swept his gaze over Kroba City. It was small, no skyscrapers in sight, the tallest buildings only 5 stories high. With steady effort, he estimated, the repairs would take 3 to 5 days. If he could boost the wand's amplification, maybe he could wrap things up in a day or 2. Clearing his throat, Lucian added, "There is, however, one favor I need to ask you." Makarov's expression turned attentive. "Of course, if it helps speed up the work, consider it done." "I'll handle it later," Makarov said, tapping his chest with a confident grin. Beside him, Lucian, tasked with nothing more demanding than minor repairs, nodded in agreement. Makarov's gaze sharpened as he addressed their enemy. "All of you, die!" The three-eyed demon towered over them, its massive wooden body radiating menace but offering scant real defense. Under the coordinated onslaught of the 3 Urzas, its resilience crumbled. In fury, it drew in a deep, rattling breath, bringing a strange flute-shaped artifact to its lips. Cursed flute. T of killing. A purple magic circle unfurled above the demon's head. The grass all around the ruined city withered in an instant, then a wave of arcane energy exploded outward. The sputtering sound echoed like, of all things, a fart. For a beat, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Lucian exchanged a stunned glance with Makarov. "That can't be it, right?" Lucy, standing just beside them, shook her head in disbelief. They had all heard the legends of Zeref's cursed flute, a covert weapon designed to unleash a death curse without warning. Yet here and now, after all that build-up, nothing had happened. Not a scratch, not a sigh of pain from any of the guild members. Silence hung heavy in the air as the demon blinked in confusion, and the 3 Urzas readied themselves for another assault. Whatever this trick had been, it clearly hadn't worked. As long as any target stands within the flute's effective range, ordinary people and low-rank mages have their souls instantly drained. Death follows without warning. Slightly stronger magicians can hold out for a moment, but if they're even remotely skilled in silent magic or enchantment, the soul-stealing curse is rendered utterly powerless. That was precisely why this technique was sealed away long ago. The president of the Four-Headed Hound Magisters Guild leaned forward. "As it turns out, this weakness still remains." Lucian's eyes widened in understanding. No wonder the guild leaders had shown so little concern. Silencing magic wasn't arcane lore, most of them would be proficient in it, and even if the soul-draining flute fell out of play, the 3-eyed demon, towering in size and armed with a devastating magical energy cannon, remained a threat beyond the capability of ordinary fighters. Lucian certainly wasn't powerful enough to face it alone. So, because he's been riddled with wounds, he can't hold the flute properly, and therefore can't channel the killing curse. Lucy, listening to the four-headed hound's explanation, nodded in agreement. Now she, too, understood why the demon's soul-draining curse had failed. A thunderous roar split the air as the three-eyed demon staggered to a halt, clutching his ruined throat. "Ah, my voice! My beautiful voice! What a joke!" he spat, furious with himself. Shaking off his embarrassment, the demon's three eyes flared, and he swept his arms outward. A tidal wave of living flame surged toward the group. But Lucian was already moving. He lunged forward, inhaled deeply, and with a sound like a roar of hunger, drew every trailing ember into his chest. The blaze vanished, leaving only scorched air in its wake. Lucian straightened, a triumphant grin on his face. "Tastes amazing, and my magic's completely restored." Seizing the opening, Gray's magic flared. He poured every remaining drop of mana into a colossal ice whirlwind, a razor-sharp, spinning disk of frost that shot straight for the demon's midsection. In an instant, the abomination's lower torso was cleaved in two, blood and ichor spraying across the stone floor. Now, Gray raised his voice above the demon's wail. "Black feather armor." Above them, Aluza morphed her air-wheel armor into the jet-black plumage of her feather armor, each quill a blade honed to deadly perfection. She plummeted like a falling star, sword slashing in a single, lightning-fast arc. The demon's head split wide open, the wail cut short by a final, brutal strike. Silence fell. Gray and Aluza stood panting, eyes fixed on the demon's writhing form. Behind them, Lucian stayed alert. His right hand flickered into life, haloed by ember magic. His left ignited in a blaze of scarlet flame. He drew them together, palms outward, voice low and steady. "Flames in my right, flames in my left. Combine your power." And as the two fires twined, their heat so intense it warped the air, the trio braced themselves, ready for whatever darkness might tremble into view next. "Take this, Fire Dragon's brilliant flame." Having been thoroughly wounded by Urza and Gray, the three-eyed demon staggered in midair. Seizing the moment, Natsu vaulted high above the battlefield. Infused with the very demon flames he'd just devoured, he summoned his greatest power in one scorching burst. A colossal pillar of fire roared downward, slamming into the demon with earth-shaking force. The explosion rattled the sky, sending shockwaves through the air. When the acrid smoke finally drifted away, the monster had vanished without a trace. In its place lay nothing but a cursed skull-adorned flute, clattering softly against the ground. Chapter 110. The Ultimate Magic Wand. "We did it! We did it!" As the three-eyed demon shattered into dust, Lucy and Happy threw their arms around each other, their cheers ringing out above the applause of every guild leader present. After all, this creature was the product of Zeref's black magic, something even 3 S-class wizards working in concert would find nearly impossible to destroy. Makarov's heart swelled with pride as he watched his guildmates bask in their hard-earned praise. That pride, however, came crashing down the next instant, when Lucian's voice cut through the celebration like a blade. "Master, if you can't secure the cursed flute for me, I'll have no choice but to transfer to another guild." They stood amid the smoking ruins of Kroba City, the ground scarred by the massive crater. Natsu's final blow had torn through its center. Rebuilding this mess would take ages, if it was even possible. "I've got it covered, don't you worry," Makarov barked, whiskers trembling. In a blur of motion faster than any eye could follow, he darted forward, snatched the charred instrument from the wreckage, and stepped back just as the kingdom army arrived. With a fierce twist, he snapped off the skull-shaped mouthpiece and, bending low, pressed the rest of the cursed flute into Lucian's hand. Around them, the stunned silence spoke volumes. The prize was theirs, if only they could keep it. "Quick, hide it before anyone from the Kingdom Knights spots it." "Thank you, President." Lucian slipped the cursed flute into his backpack, his shoulders sagging with relief. He had planned to wait for the perfect moment, when everyone's attention was elsewhere, to snip off a small section of the flute's shaft and fashion it into the core of a new magic wand. But now the entire royal army, along with every regional lord and president, had descended on the courtyard. Even though they just defeated the three-eyed demon, There was no chance he could slip back to that flute unnoticed. Moments ago, he'd approached President Makarov with a fabricated story. He was developing a magical device to greatly enhance his repair spells and needed a fragment of the cursed flute as raw material. Lucian had hoped for only a tiny piece. Instead, in true Makarov fashion, the president shattered the skull carving at the flute's tip and handed him the entire remaining shaft. The longer the piece, the better Lucian's wand would channel magic. Makarov eyed him sharply. "You're the commander of the Kingdom Knights here, aren't you? This cursed flute is the only remnant, completely damaged and barely usable." Lucian gave a tight nod and secured the flute against the bottom of his pack. If he could harvest even a sliver of that wood, his next wand would be more powerful than anything he'd crafted before. "Later, the council's envoys will arrive," Lucian instructed, his voice low but urgent. "Hand this over to them and make sure they seal it properly. Oh, and tell them we'll send a repair crew in 2 days to restore the city's damage. That's all." Cradling the jagged, freshly severed skull, Lucian darted through the stunned ranks of the Kingdom Knights. Before anyone could protest, he pressed the bone fragment into the Legion commander's unresisting hands. Then, just as he'd promised, he signaled to Urza and the others and vanished in a ripple of teleportation magic. "The Council's teleport spells are fast," Lucian had warned them beforehand. "The moment they get this, they'll arrive here. We need to be long gone." Urza chuckled and shook her head. "Some things never change, Lucian." Under the moonlit canopy of the forest, 4 familiar figures, once Lucian's fiercest comrades in fairy tale, and the captain of the Blue Pegasus shared wry smiles. Years ago, each had left the guild to pursue personal dreams and ideals, founding their own wizarding houses. Still, the bonds they'd forged with fairy tale remained unbroken. That night, the old friends trekked silently along the winding path back to Magnolia City. The distant glow of lanterns promised warmth, and perhaps someday soon, the chance to rebuild what they'd fought so hard to protect. Lucian's cooking magic filled the night air with the rich scent of roasting meat. He stood beside the crackling campfire, wand in hand, stirring a bubbling broth in a small iron pot. Around him, his friends, the fiery Natsu, the ever-energetic Happy, and Guildmaster Makarov, settled in for an impromptu roadside dinner. Natsu shredded a golden roasted lamb leg with his teeth, leaving the bones sparkling clean. "Lucian, this is incredible. Why don't you join our team for missions from now on? Your magic would be a huge help in the field." Lucian smiled, ladling a cup of steaming broth toward him. As he did, he reached behind Natsu's head and carefully snipped off a tuft of hair. "Here," he said, offering the bowl. "Fresh broth, and Natsu's hair is perfect for wand cores." Happy, perched on a nearby rock and savoring a grilled fishtail, waved a furry paw. "Count me out," he chirped around a mouthful of scales. "I'm not ready for any more missions yet." Natsu grinned around his lamb leg. "Ah, come on, Happy. Magic grows fastest when you're actually fighting monsters, not just loafing around the guild." Makarov, who'd been quietly watching the exchange, cleared his throat. The old master's kindly face was lit by the firelight. "I appreciate your offer, Natsu," he said, addressing Lucian, "and I'm proud of how far you've come. For the sake of fairy tale, I'd love to have you stationed here. Our emergency response team could use someone with your skills." He paused, tapping his cane thoughtfully. "But if you truly want to develop your magic, nothing beats real missions. Lucian, you'll learn more by teaming up with Natsu and the others than by staying behind the guild doors." Lucian dipped a crust of bread into the broth, reflecting on Makarov's words. Outside the camp, the moon climbed over the dark silhouettes of the forest. Despite the exhaustion of their long walk back from the hijacked Eligor train, it had broken down, and their rented magic wagon was destroyed in the skirmish. Lucian felt a spark of excitement at the prospect of traveling with Fairy Tale's strongest pair. He took a careful bite of bread, then met Natsu's hopeful gaze. "All right," he said finally, "I'm in. Let's see how fast my magic can really grow." Happy cheered, Natsu howled with joy, and even Makarov cracked a proud grin. Under the quiet glow of the fire, their new alliance felt as warm and promising as the broth in Lucian's pot, fuel for whatever adventures lay ahead. Lucian had always placed his own magical growth above the broader goals of the guild. If his priority had been the guild's interests, he would have ordered his fellow wizards into service under the council's watchful eye. Instead, he insisted on choosing his own path. Facing Makarov in the guild hall, he offered a polite refusal. "I'm not ready to head out on a mission yet," he said. "I need more time in the library to study every spellbook I can find and chart my own course in magic. Once I've decided on my specialty, I'll form a party and take on missions." It wasn't a convenient excuse. Lucian truly planned to immerse himself in the guild's extensive library before venturing beyond the city walls. What surprised him, though, was how effortlessly Makarov had attempted to persuade him to join a team. It was a reminder of why the guild wizards revered their master. He was every bit the leader they needed. 2 days later, Lucian boarded the first train to resume service and made his way to Kroba City. The city remained a shattered ruin, but the vast crater that once yawned at its center had been filled, no doubt the work of an earth mage. As the train pulled into the station, Lucian stepped onto the platform, anticipation humming through him. Soon he would decide his destiny, and with it shape the course of his adventures in this vast, magical world. All of Kroba's citizens had been relocated to makeshift military tents beyond the city walls. At the shattered gate, Eurusia, head of the council's investigative squad, crossed her arms and fixed a sharp gaze on the small golden kitten wearing a leather satchel. "You must be Lucian, the repair wizard from Fairy Tale," she said, her tone equal parts curiosity and caution. Lucian sat back on his haunches, flicked his tail once, and offered a polite nod. "That's me. If there are no objections, I'll begin the repairs right away." Eurusia's eyes narrowed. When Fairy Tale announced someone capable of restoring the entire city, she'd volunteered to lead the team, eager to learn whether this wizard, like herself, possessed the forbidden arc of time. She certainly hadn't expected it would be a cat. Behind his calm exterior, Lucian was racing through his own agenda. After witnessing the true power of Urza, Natsu, and Grey, he knew he still had much to learn. He'd already laid the groundwork for his giant and light magics, but real progress would take steady, step-by-step practice. First things first, though, the city needed him now. He drew a deep breath, focused on the crumbling walls before him, and prepared to set his repair spells in motion. Lucian paused a moment longer than anyone expected, then lifted Feng Yong's enchanted goggles to his eyes. Through those lenses, he could analyze every arcane gesture, every subtle flow of mana, and ultimately fuse those disparate magics into a far more potent whole. Ultia, standing a few paces away, offered him an encouraging smile. "Very well, Mr. Lucian. Show us what you've learned." He turned his back on the gathered onlookers, reached into his satchel, and drew out the wand he'd fashioned from the cursed flute's shaft and a lock of Natsu's hair. Black veins of eldritch energy pulsed along its length. Lucian braced himself, closed his eyes for a beat, then exhaled. With a series of fluid motions, finger twirls and wrist flicks, he traced a complex sigil in the air. The wand's tip glowed, at first a dull ember, then a brilliant pale blue. The fissures and crumbling stones of the ruined archway before him began to knit themselves together. Cracks sealed, dust whisked away, mortar reformed with near-alchemical precision. When Lucian lowered his arm, the arch stood whole and unblemished, as if carved anew. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ultia stepped forward, awe and approval shining in her eyes. Lucian allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. This was only the beginning. Chapter 111, 3 Light Pillars, second update. Lucian breathed a quiet sigh of triumph. As he'd predicted, using the cursed flute as the wand's core had unleashed power far beyond any ordinary branch or crystal, nearly a 20-fold increase in his magic output. Holding the instrument-turned wand aloft, he felt its dormant energy hum to life. "Restored to its original condition," he murmured, a note of satisfaction in his voice. With this supreme focus of power, the repair spell he'd prepared rippled outward like the tide turning back time. The shattered stones of Kroba's ruined streets knit themselves together. Crumbling towers rose once more, their weathered stones regaining the sharp edges of youth. Faded frescoes regained their brilliant colors, and collapsed aqueducts reformed, water flowing through them again. Every inch of the city seemed to reverse a century of decay. Lucian didn't dare pause. He poured every ounce of stamina into his wand, unleashing wave after wave of repair magic. From dawn's first light until the sun dipped low on the horizon, he hammered away at the spellcasting. By the 10th hour, a wavering headache bloomed behind his eyes, and his arms felt like lead, but he could sense Kroba's heartbeat growing stronger under his touch. Finally, as the last pillar of light faded into the evening sky and the final cracks in the old city walls sealed themselves shut, Lucian lowered his wand. Exhaustion washed over him, but so did relief. Before him stood a fully restored Kroba, its bustling market square, its proud watchtowers, its orderly streets, every detail exactly as it must have been in its golden age. "It's done," he whispered, scarcely believing it himself. Sheathing the cursed flute wand, he turned toward the gathered council mages, Ulruchia among them, who watched in awed silence. Lucian offered them a tired but genuine nod. Then, leaning on his staff, he made his way to the nearest train depot. Even with his magic reserves intact, 10 straight hours of high-level spell work had left him bone-tired. As the locomotive's whistle blew, Lucian settled onto the last car, the city's rejuvenated skyline receding behind him. Tomorrow, he would rest. But tonight, contentment and relief were enough. After casting his repair spell, Lucian sensed it had grown markedly stronger. Strange, this world didn't possess an Arc of Time Act, yet here was a restoration spell of its own. Lucia watched him drift skyward, puzzled. A full day of observation had proven that the mysterious cat wasn't invoking any time-bending Arc of Time magic, but an entirely new form of repair magic she'd never seen before. Fortunately, it was purely restorative, an auxiliary ability with no offensive power. By contrast, her own Arc of Time not only repaired, but could unleash devastating attacks and even halt the flow of time itself. "If that's all it does, I suppose there's no cause for alarm," she muttered. "By the way, I heard Natsu is challenging Urza tomorrow. You might want to stop by and watch." Lucian landed at the train station, purchased his ticket, and boarded the return train. He squinted against the fading daylight and drifted into a light sleep, letting his energy refill. That evening, as soon as he stepped off the bus at Magnolia Station, President Makarov was there to greet him. The old guildmaster smiled. "How did it go, Lucian?" Lucian bowed his head respectfully. "Everything's been restored to its original state, President." Makarov chuckled warmly. "Excellent work," Lucian smirked to himself. "Let's see if the council still dares to give me trouble," he thought. In a few days, he'd pay them a visit and make sure they properly thanked him. If Fairy Tale hadn't intervened this time, who knew how far things might have spiraled? When Lucian voiced his agreement, Makarov puffed out his chest and threw back his head in triumphant laughter. Once he'd finished, he laid a hand on Lucian's shoulder and said, "You've earned tremendous credit for this mission. And since you're studying light magic, there's a powerful, defensive spell I've created myself, one of my finest. I'll teach it to you as soon as I can." A light defensive spell? Lucian's eyes lit up. The light magic he'd seen in the archives struck him as rather tame. If Makarov, a master of the discipline, thought it worthy of teaching, there had to be something extraordinary about it. After all, light magic's sacred essence and its natural strength against dark magic made it uniquely valuable. Makarov beamed with pride. "It's called the 3 Pillars of God, my strongest defensive enchantment. Not even the Holy 10 could break through it." He lifted his chin high, his face alight with satisfaction. Lucian straightened, meeting the guild president's gaze with determined eyes. "Please, President," he said earnestly, "if you ever have another repair job like this, don't hesitate to call on me. I love fixing things more than anything." He reminded himself that Makarov hadn't shown him every secret trick when teaching him giant magic and light magic. After all, Lucian was still a newcomer to Fairy Tale, and the president wouldn't hand over all the guild's hidden techniques at once. It would have been ridiculous. If there were ever more powerful spells to learn, Lucian knew that a few days of devoted practice would be nothing. The next morning, in Magnolia City's bustling crossroads square, 2 of Fairy Tale's strongest members, Urza Scarlet and Natsu Dragneel, stood face to face, ready to spar. A tight ring of guild wizards and excited townsfolk had formed around them. "Natsu, give it your all," someone from the crowd yelled. "My queen, show him what you've got," another chimed in. Before a single spell had been cast, cheers and shouts filled the air. Fairy Tail had been part of Magnolia City for years, and its members were beloved by all. Rather than fear a magical duel, the residents relished the excitement. After all, how often did you get to watch two of the guild's champions go head-to-head? Word spread like wildfire through the square. Fire Dragon Natsu was about to challenge the Fairy Queen. Almost at once, a crowd of guild wizards and curious onlookers surged forward to catch the spectacle. Kana, never one to miss an opportunity, hastily set up a betting table, quill in hand, coins already clinking in her palm. Place your bets, she called out. 10-1 on Natsu, 10-1 on Urza. Who's your money on? Most wagers went on Urza Scarlet, the S-class mage known across the realm for her unshakable discipline and iron resolve. A few risk-takers, however, backed Natsu. After all, he'd grown by leaps and bounds since their first encounter. Back then, Urza had decisively beaten him, but more recently, Natsu's explosive final blow against that three-eyed demon had torn a massive crater through the city wall. A victory over Urza no longer seemed impossible. Standing just beyond the throng, Lucian, formerly known in translation as George, watched with keen interest. He hadn't bet a single coin, but he couldn't deny the thrill of awaiting the duel's outcome. In theory, Urza's S-class status made her the favorite. In practice, Lucian reminded himself of that incredible blast Natsu had unleashed. One strike had reshaped an entire district, leaving everyone to wonder whether Urza could withstand the Dragon Slayer's fiery wrath. Suddenly, a ripple of anticipation passed through the crowd. Urza herself appeared at the edge of the clearing. She wore a set of gleaming crimson armor, Emperor Yan's legendary plate, its polished surface catching the torchlight. In her hand, she gripped a colossal Vulcan sword, its blade shimmering with barely contained power. Twin tails of scarlet hair swayed behind her as she strode into the center of the arena, every step echoing with confident authority. The air crackled. Bets were down, eyes were fixed, and in that moment, every spectator knew they were about to witness a clash for the history books. Lucian watched with a mix of awe and apprehension as Lucky Olietta adjusted her glasses and announced, "Emperor armor. It's fire. Proof enchantment halves the power of any flame magic. Natsu's in trouble now." All around him, the members of Fairy Tail exchanged nods of agreement. Even Happy darted over to Kana, eager to switch his entire wager from Natsu to Urza, much to Lucy's exasperation. "Facing someone like Urza isn't easy," Lucy muttered. Lucian suppressed a sigh. Dealing with Urza Scarlet meant confronting her dazzling arsenal of magical armors and weapons. Unless an opponent possessed far greater raw strength, her defenses would invariably tip the scales in her favor. Sure enough, whatever fire Natsu unleashed now only struck with half its usual force. "Let the battle begin," boomed Master Makarov, his voice carrying across the arena. At his command, Urza and Natsu charged each other. Urza's Emperor armor glowed faintly, repelling every fiery strike. Realizing direct fire attacks were futile, Natsu channeled his Dragon Slayer magic inward, infusing every muscle with searing draconic energy. He closed the distance in a blur, fists and elbows crackling with heat as he lunged at Urza's unyielding defenses. Blow met steel, steel met flame, and the two titans clashed in a whirlwind of sparks. Their movements were so rapid, Lucian's eyes strained to keep pace. For long moments, it was impossible to say who held the upper hand, only that neither warrior would yield an inch. "Natsu, you've certainly come a long way these past years, but your time's up." Urza sidestepped his latest, furious strike with effortless grace. A flicker of relief crossed her eyes, and in the next heartbeat, she was gone. Before Natsu could brace himself, she reappeared at his side and drove her blade home. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. There was no doubt now. Her earlier restraint had vanished, and she'd unleashed her full power. Chapter 112, Clues to the Dragon-Slaying Crystal, 3rd update. When I get the chance, I'll ask the president if he knows where to find a dragon-slaying crystal. Lucian watched Urza Scarlet and Natsu Dragneel's duel with growing awe. Although Natsu ultimately fell, the sheer potency of his dragon-slaying magic left a lasting impression. Urza's strength came from her own skill, amplified by the blessings of her magical armor. Natsu, however, wielded a power that far surpassed ordinary spells. His body itself was infused with the ancient energy of a dragon slayer. Lucian had seen Urza's Flame Emperor armor suppress countless flame attacks, cutting their power in half. Yet against Natsu's dragon-slaying fire, the armor barely dented the output. Under suppression, normal fire would dwindle to 50% of its strength. Natsu's dragon-forged flames still roared at 80% or more. Back in Lucian's world, enchanted weapons and magic armors were nearly unheard of. Even so, he found himself drawn to dragon-slaying magic. Its greatest advantage was its elemental voracity. By devouring the very element it wielded, the caster's power grew ever stronger. If he could get his hands on a crystal attuned to that magic, well, that was exactly what he planned to ask the president about when he had the chance. Lucian stood in the ruined street, picturing the impossible. If a nuclear bomb ever struck, he'd use his dragon-slaying magic to absorb the blast's energy and then turn it back against his foes. He shook his head, dismissing the fantasy. "Repair it as before," he called, and with a few swift gestures, the street mended itself stone by stone. Once the damage was healed, Lucian and the others returned to their guild. 3 days later, they sat together in the Great Hall, enjoying a quiet lunch. Lucian cleared his throat and addressed Guildmaster Makarov. "Master Makarov, I heard your grandson Laxus became a dragon slayer by implanting a dragon crystal. Is that true?" Makarov raised an eyebrow in mild surprise. "You've heard correctly. Am I to understand you're interested in the dragon crystal?" Lucian nodded without hesitation. "Very much so. If I could harness even a fragment of that power, I'd become a dragon slayer myself." From across the table, the guild's resident harpy, always quick with a quip, flapped her wings and smirked. "So what you're saying is you want to end up as soft and fluffy as a chinchilla, meow?" Lucian blinked in genuine surprise, then chuckled. "You're not wrong." At his admission, Makarov leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "The dragon crystal is forged from the heart of a dragon, an extraordinarily rare and potent artifact. Few have ever laid eyes on one, let alone survived the process of implantation. Decades ago, a mage named Serena discovered its existence. She told Ivan about it, hoping to unlock its secrets, but the trail went cold after that." Lucian swallowed. "Then our only lead is Serena's notes?" Makarov nodded gravely. "Yes, and they're scattered across the continent. If you truly wish to become a dragon slayer, you'll need to track them down." Lucian's heart raced. The quest ahead was daunting, but if anyone could pull it off, it would be him. He squared his shoulders and met Makarov's gaze. "Then, let's begin the search." Makarov drained the last of his wine, set the goblet on the table, and shook his head. "I've combed every corner of Ishgard for a dragon crystal to restore Laxus's body. No luck. The only thunder dragon crystal I ever managed to obtain was purchased from a distant wizard on the continent of Kiltina. I wouldn't hold out much hope." He sighed deeply. "Dragons have long since faded into legend. Even if one could be located, slaying it and harvesting its heart to forge a dragon-slaying crystal, that's the sort of feat bards sing about, not something a guildmaster can accomplish on demand." Lucian felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You said it came from Kiltina?" Makarov nodded solemnly. "Yes, but that's the only one anyone's seen in generations." Lucian closed his eyes and recalled the geography section of an old grimoire he'd studied back on Aslant. 4 continents, it said: east, west, south, and north. The eastern continent, known as Ishgard, was home to over 500 wizard guilds and several kingdoms, Fiore among them. To the west lay Alakidasia, a vast empire cut off from the east by treacherous seas. No ships, no letters, no news ever passed between them. If the only Thunder Dragon crystal in Ishgard had to come from Kiltina, and no one knew where Kiltina lay in relation to Alakidasia or the other continents, Lucian realized just how slim their chances were. Lucian leaned back in his chair, surveying the guild hall's lively bustle. Every so often, newcomers from the western continent drifted into Ishgard, seeking work or a fresh start. In fact, 2 of their own, Biska and Grammy, had originally hailed from the west. Beyond that, however, knowledge grew scarce. The southern continent remained an enigma. Scholars whispered of its existence, but no mage had ever confirmed its reality. And Kiltina, tucked away in the far north, was linked to some century-old mission so obscure that even the guild's archives offered no clear explanation. "Who is Serena?" Lucian suddenly asked, redirecting the conversation. He'd been inching toward the subject of the dragon crystal, curious about Ivan's mysterious purchase. But instead of pressing Ivan for details, he shifted gears. Mirajane had confided in him that Ivan was Makarov's own son, and the guildmaster had once cast him out for reasons no one fully understood. That harsh decision had fractured Makarov's relationship with his grandson, Laxus, and dug up old wounds best left undisturbed. Bringing up Ivan now would only stir up painful memories. Besides, Lucian reminded himself, the clues about the dragon crystal were already falling into place. He just needed more time to grow stronger. When he was ready, he could approach Ivan directly, or even journey to the northern continent himself to uncover the truth. Until then, patience would be his greatest ally. Serena, revered as God Serena, was once the most feared wizard of Ishgar's Holy Ten and the unrivaled leader of the four heavenly kings. 8 dragon crystals lay fused within his body, granting him mastery over 8 distinct forms of anti-dragon magic. Then, without warning, he vanished years ago, and since then, no one's heard a word about him. Makarov let out a heavy sigh. Lucian's eyes went wide. 8 dragon crystals? He could hardly believe it. He had assumed a mage could only ever host one of these rare crystals. If Serena could hold 8 at once, what was to stop someone, himself perhaps, from fusing even more? If he gathered every dragon crystal in existence, infusing them all into his body, then every spell he cast, regardless of element, could take on anti-dragon properties. In theory, each victory would only serve to strengthen him further. Lucian's pulse quickened at the thought. But suddenly he yawned, the world around him swaying like a ship in stormy seas. What's happening? Why am I so sleepy? A wave of exhaustion tried to drag him under, but Lucian's psychic power flared to life, bright and fierce, banishing the drowsiness in an instant. As his vision cleared, his mind raced with a single, electrifying question. How many dragon crystals could I really fuse? Lucian watched in shock as one guild member after another slumped to the floor, Urza, the S-class wizard among them. He cursed under his breath. Sleep magic. Has someone breached the guild? In an instant, he stretched his newly sprouted wings and drew the high-grade magic rod from his back. He leveled it at Urza. Dispel! To his relief and surprise, the guildmaster, Makarov, blinked awake. Clearly the old man had resisted the sleeping spell on his own. Lucian turned the rod on Urza, undoing the enchantment that held her down, then went on to Natsu, Gray, and the others, freeing them one by one. Before he could finish, Makarov raised a hand. Lucian, calm yourself. This isn't an enemy, assault. It's Mr. Gang. He hates crowds, so he knocked everyone out with a sleeping spell. Mr. Gang? Lucian echoed, stunned. He'd heard the rumors. Everyone agreed Urza was the guild's most powerful female wizard, but opinions were split on who held the title of strongest male mage. Some said Laxus, others swore it was the reclusive S-class wizard Mr. Gang. Now, it seemed, he was about to find out which rumors were true. Lucian's thoughts drifted to Gildart's Cleaver, the S-class wizard universally acknowledged as Fairy Tale's strongest. Rumor has it he volunteered for the dreaded 100-year quest and hasn't set foot in the guild for years. Naturally, no one even bothered to include him when they compiled the candidates for the kingdom's most powerful male wizard. In contrast, Natsu and Gray have both exploded in strength over the past few years. But, in most people's eyes, they've only just managed to crack that list. Chapter 113. Are you interested in being my cat? The moment Master Makarov finished speaking, the guild doors burst open. A hooded, masked mage strode in, 5 wands strapped across his back. In our world, magical wands exist too, but unlike Lucian's unique staff, which has no spells of its own and simply amplifies and accelerates whatever magic he channels through it, these wands are more like precision instruments. Each one is keyed to a specific spell or two, and only trained wizards can wield them effectively. Someday, once Lucian masters his craft and can swing his wand with blinding speed, he'll be able to hack through something as massive as a melon and unleash a rapid-fire volley of shards, almost like a magical machine gun. The masked mage said nothing. He climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, selected a job from the mission board, and slipped back out through the gate as quietly as he'd come. Lucian watched him go and shook his head. That's social anxiety taken to a whole new level, he mused. As the guild buzz resumed around him, Lucian let out a soft sigh. Characters like Mr. Gang are surprisingly rare in Fairy Tale. Settling onto a bench, he pulled a tome from his satchel. I'll catch up on some reading, he told himself. Thanks to Master Makarov, he now had every detail about the dragon crystal. After lunch, Lucian greeted his classmates with a nod and unfurled his wings, preparing to soar up to the library for another afternoon of magical study. Before he took off, he caught sight of a sleek tabby sunning itself on the courtyard wall. Landing lightly, he crouched beside it. "Hello there, kitty," he said with a friendly smile. "You look like you'd make a fine familiar. Interested in joining me?" He wiggled a finger invitingly and felt the familiar flutter of his wings responding beneath his coat when an icy voice cut through the air from above. Lucian paused and looked up. On the second-floor balcony stood a tall figure in a dark cloak, hair the color of summer wheat, and a jagged lightning-shaped scar slashing across his left cheek. "I hear you can cast repair magic," the stranger called down, cool and measured. "And I saw you shrug off Mistgun sleep magic just now. That's quite the feat. You'd make an excellent and obedient familiar for me." A stunned hush fell over the courtyard, then someone gasped, "Laxus!" Whispers rippled through the students. Lucian's gaze sharpened. This was Laxus, grandson of the Academy president, wielder of the Thunder Dragon Slayer magic fused with the Dragon Crystal, and an S-class mage at St. Dolia. His reputation for arrogance was as notorious as his power. Lucian let out a low chuckle and shook his head, mustache twitching. "I'm afraid I'm not interested." He spread his wings again. His goal here was to strengthen his own magic, not to become anyone's pet. With that, he lifted off toward the library, leaving Laxus and the courtyard's surprised onlookers behind. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows of the Fairy Tale Guild Hall as Laxus made his entrance, cloaks swirling behind him. He found Lucian, formerly known as George, the little cat with the rare gift for repairing magic, lounging against a wooden support beam. "If you're serious about forming a team," Laxus said coolly, "you'd pick Urza, Lucy, and Rebby. Now that would turn heads on a mission." Lucian flicked his tail and gave a dismissive shrug. "Honestly, that lineup's too predictable. I'd rather go solo." Laxus's lips curved into an appreciative smirk. "You'll be out on missions from now on anyway. Why stick with a bunch of underdogs when you could train under me and skyrocket your strength? You've been holed up in the library long enough." He paused, letting his words sink in. Ever since he'd set his sights on replacing his grandfather as guild master, Laxus had been quietly recruiting powerful allies. Winning over Lucian, the invaluable magic fixer, would be a major coup. Lucian's ears pricked. "Underdogs, huh? Name one. I'll happily prove I'm no loser." From across the hall, Natsu's fist slammed onto a table. "How dare you?" Laxus chuckled, arms crossing over his chest. "You, Natsu, couldn't even keep pace with Urza in a spar, yet you think you can take me on?" Natsu's cheeks burned red. "What did you just say?" Urza stepped between them, steel resolve in her gaze. In an instant, a magical sword of gleaming steel floated into her hand. She'd never dueled Laxus one-on-one, but she didn't doubt her own power. "That's enough, Laxus," she said quietly, voice unwavering. "Show some respect. Don't be so rash, Urza. Laxus is always like this. There's no point in getting yourself worked up." Gray, Levy, and the others hurried between Urza and Laxus, fearing a full-blown brawl. At last, Urza took a deep breath, nodded to her friends, and sheathed her magical blade. But Laxus only puffed out his chest. "You still don't get it? I'm the strongest mage in this guild." "And I don't accept that," Urza replied evenly. "If you truly believe it, prove it." Natsu, fired up by Urza's challenge, bounded onto a nearby table, preparing to leap up to the second-floor balcony and face Laxus directly. Halfway through his jump, however, he was met with the legendary slap of Guildmaster Makarov, flattened instantly to the floor. "You're not allowed upstairs until you've earned S-class status," Makarov admonished. Laxus laughed loudly as Natsu groaned on the ground. "Did the old man just smack you down? Hilarious." He kicked Natsu once in the ribs for good measure. "I'm never giving up my spot as Fairy Tale's strongest. Urza, Gray, whoever, it doesn't matter. I'm the best here." "Laxus, enough," Makarov sighed, rubbing his temples. With a dismissive snort, Laxus vaulted off the railing and headed for the door, but before he left, he paused by Lucian, standing silently against the far wall, and fixed him with a steely glare. "Watch and learn, Lucian. I'll prove exactly why I deserve this guild's top rank." Then you'll see what real power looks like. And with that, Laxus strode out, leaving Fairy Tale's Guildhall buzzing with anticipation, and Lucian deep in thought about the challenge that lay ahead. Lucian leaned back, studying Laxus with a cool, appraising gaze. "Your colors suit me perfectly," Laxus said, flashing that arrogant grin of his. "One day, you'll be my cat." Lucian's lips curved into a wry smile. "Maybe. If you bring me a dragon crystal, I'll give it some thought." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a flat refusal either. If Laxus could really track down a dragon crystal, or at least point him toward one, Lucian might consider an alliance. The next morning, the guild was in uproar. Late last night, Natsu had, in his usual grandstanding fashion, ordered Happy to break into the second-floor archives and snatch an S-rank mission sheet. He'd then rescued Lucy by kidnapping her, to tackle the mission together and prove his strength. Needless to say, Master Makarov was furious. He dispatched Gray at once to retrieve the duo and the disgruntled feline companion. Lucian heard the clamor but didn't bother to ask questions. Drama among guildmates wasn't his concern. His focus remained solely on mastering new magic and growing stronger. In another universe entirely, Nick Fury stood before agents Phil Coulson and Natasha Romanoff, passing them a dossier thick with intercepted data and forensic analysis. He folded his arms as they read. "What's your verdict?" he asked. Natasha exchanged a glance with Coulson. "Our memories have been manipulated," she said in unison with him. Fury's jaw tightened. "Agreed, and if someone's tampering with our minds, this is serious." They fell silent, each contemplating the implications of minds under siege and the unknown force pulling the strings. As highly trained agents, they all recognized at once that key details in the official report didn't match their own memories. Since none of them had any reason to lie, the only conclusion was that their recollections had been tampered with. A plausible scenario, given that organizations can achieve similar effects to psychic powers by using advanced hypnotic or brainwashing technology. Nick Fury leaned back in his chair and asked, "Any suspects?" Phil Coulson thought for a moment. "Yes, Lucian." When the battle erupted, only Pepperpots, Tony's assistant, and his bodyguard Lucian were nearby. Lucian's cool demeanor and the fact that no one truly knew who he was made him a natural candidate for having manipulated their memories. Fury nodded and turned his attention to Natasha Romanoff. "What about you?" Black Widow frowned. "I have no suspects. Anyone who might have interfered with my memory is dead." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Before we infiltrated the Acre Genetics facility, my recollections were consistent. Surveillance footage and my fellow agents' accounts all confirm it. It was only after we went inside that things started to shift. With Rice and every guard at the base reduced to charred corpses, there was no way they could have tampered with Lucian's memory." "Do you think it was the same individual, or some unknown force, that altered our memories?" The director then summoned Lucian and Coulson for questioning. Both men were still exhibiting the same strange symptoms. It was clear he'd stumbled onto something significant. Chapter 114, Spellboundary, 5th Update. Nick Fury didn't hesitate. He leaned forward and nodded. "Yes. When our teams raided the Yakkel's gene compound, they recovered shell casings stamped with the Stark Industries logo. That points to one conclusion. The person who freed Tony Stark from the 10 Rings, tampered with your memories, and then torched the entire Yakli gene facility must be this Lucian, about whom we have absolutely no records. Or perhaps he belongs to some shadowy organization we've yet to discover." Agent Coulson stared in disbelief. "Director, you haven't turned up a single file on him?" Coulson's shock was palpable. It might have made sense for Lucian to evade civilian databases, but for S-Shield's global intelligence network to turn up nothing, no aliases, no travel logs, no bank transactions, was unthinkable. Even if someone stitched together a dozen counterfeit identities, S-Shield would have found a stray clue. Fury shook his head. Nothing. He appeared from nowhere. No birth certificate, no fingerprints, no digital footprint of any kind. I debriefed Stark last night, hoping for a lead. Tony had nothing. It's like Lucian simply materialized out of thin air. Nick Fury's expression grew grave as he folded his arms. "From now on, drop everything else and cooperate fully with the memory recovery protocol." An organization had materialized out of nowhere, powerful enough to manipulate memories and operate completely beyond S-Shield's reach. Fury couldn't afford to ignore it. His top priority was to uncover who or what was really behind this group and why they'd taken such an interest in Tony Stark. 2 weeks later, after deploying every piece of Black Ops technology at his disposal and enlisting expert psychologists and master hypnotists, Agent Coulson and Black Widow finally unlocked the hidden fragments in Lucian's mind. In the sterile glow of the debriefing room, Natasha whispered, "He's a mutant, created by the Arkley Gene Corporation. That explains why there's no official record of him." Piecing together Coulson's and Natasha's notes with S-Shield's prior intelligence on Arkley, Fury at last saw the full picture. Lucian hadn't simply appeared out of nowhere. He was one of Arkley's engineered test subjects, bred for purposes the agency was only beginning to fathom. At some point, he'd broken free, escaping the facility along with a handful of other young mutants, and, in the chaos that followed, stumbled upon the long-missing Wolverine. Fury leaned back in his chair, eyes steely. Now he knew why they had to keep digging. Lucian's creators still had plans for him, and S.H.I.E.L.D. would be ready. With Wolverine's help, they escaped to New York, and from there struck out for Afghanistan to rescue Tony Stark. Once Stark was safe, he used his own resources to raise the entire Acrogene compound. Exactly how Lucian and the others tracked Stark to the Afghan desert remains a mystery. When you're dealing with mutants and superpowers, common sense tends to leave the building. But that, in broad strokes, is the mission's trajectory. Back at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, Nick Fury called Phil Coulson into his office. Laying out a dossier on the desk, he said, "Coulson, you'll continue overseeing Tony Stark and assess his fitness for the Avengers Initiative." Fury then turned to Natasha Romanoff. "Natasha, I'm assigning you to locate Lucian and Wolverine's base in New York. We can't afford to let two powered mutants slip off our radar." Originally, Fury had planned to put Natasha in charge of Stark's evaluation, but he knew Tony and the Black Widow already had a complicated history. Reassigning her risked stirring up hard feelings. Coulson's easygoing rapport made him a far better choice for keeping Stark on track and out of trouble. From Central Command's point of view, having Lucian and Wolverine stationed at the Academy may not pose an immediate threat, yet no unpredictable element can be left unchecked. If something goes wrong, they need to be able to monitor and contain it at a moment's notice. Failing that, any crisis could spiral beyond their control. Meanwhile, in a quiet hallway of the mutant school, Wolverine leaned against a pillar, cigar smoldering in hand. He watched Lucian methodically tracing arcane symbols across the plaster wall, each stroke hissing with latent power. "What are you up to?" Wolverine asked, stubbing out his cigar in the nearest ashtray. Without looking back, Lucian continued his work. "I'm erecting a magical barrier." Wolverine raised an eyebrow. "Magic barrier? Never heard of that. What's it do?" Lucian paused to survey his half-finished runes. "It wards off any hostile intruders. Think of it as an extra layer of defense for the school. You can't be too careful these days." Wolverine crossed his arms. "You and your mystical tricks." He glanced at the classroom door down the hall. "Speaking of protection, history class is starting in 5 minutes. You coming?" Lucian waved a hand dismissively. "Go on ahead. I'll catch up once this is done." Wolverine chuckled, picked up his backpack, and gave Lucian a mock salute. "Don't let it backfire on you, kid." With that, he headed off to teach the day's lesson. Ever since returning from active duty, Wolverine had discovered a new calling, sharing his wartime experiences with the next generation. The students adored his stories, and it kept him out of direct combat for a while. Lucian, meanwhile, set his jaw, dipped his brush in enchanted ink, and finished the final symbol. The barrier shimmered into being, sealing the corridor in a subtle lattice of protective wards. Mission accomplished. With no Wolverine to distract him, Lucian raised his magic barrier more swiftly than before. Over the past weeks, he devoted himself to word magic, a discipline he considered central to his growth. Unlike most schools of magic, which demand endless trial and error in isolation, text magic offered a rare advantage: regular, hands-on guidance from Lebby. Lebby, despite her frequent field missions, carved out time almost every day to study in Fairy Tale's library, just as Lucian did. Their shared routine meant he could consult her on the spot whenever a question arose. The true challenge of text magic lay not in the flashy three-dimensional sigils, but in building an unshakable theoretical foundation, understanding ancient linguistics, arcane grammar, and the subtle power of each incantation. Since joining Fairy Tail, Lucian had never let his reading slack. He pored over every scroll and tome he could find, amassing the magical knowledge that made diving into text magic far smoother than it might have been otherwise. Urza, by contrast, had eagerly asked for pointers on her costume transformation magic after the Kroba City mission, yet she still hadn't made a single practical attempt. Lucian, however, pressed on under Leby's watchful eye, laser-focused on perfecting each syllable and tonal inflection of his spells. Because in word magic, true power lay not in the shape of the magic, but in the precise resonance of the words themselves. Chapter Text: The Four Schools of Text Magic. Text magic is traditionally divided into four branches: dimensional script, arcane script, dark script, and demonic script. In most academies and public libraries, you'll only find tomes on dimensional and arcane script. Dark and demonic are strictly forbidden, their grim pages hidden or destroyed by order of the magisterium. Dimensional script focuses on giving written characters a tangible form. When you pen the word fire, it bursts into real flames. Write wind, and a cutting gale materializes. Inscribe mute, and an invisible barrier falls over the area, silencing every sound. Its versatility is remarkable, but that same diversity makes it hard to master any single effect. Even after years of diligent study, Leby's skill remains only intermediate. Arcane script differs in that it channels raw magical energy into stylized runes rather than literal manifestations of text. Its forms tend to be more uniform, often chaining together in predictable combinations, a trait that can be both an advantage and a limitation. Lucian has observed that many of dimensional script's effects overlap with standard spells from the Harbin lineage: flame wards, wind blades, silence fields, and so on. While his classmates chase glory by leaping into advanced glyphcraft, he prefers a steadier path. His plan is to master the fundamentals of dimensional script's structural principles before branching out. In particular, he intends to delve into what the old masters called technical script, a hybrid approach that blends precise rune engineering with the raw materialization techniques of dimensional glyphs. Technical script isn't covered in any beginner's manual. Its surviving texts are few, tucked away in private collections. But Lucian believes that by understanding these underlying mechanics, how a glyph's geometry dictates its energy flow, and how that flow can be redirected into a three-dimensional form, he can eventually surpass both conventional dimensional adepts and arcane specialists. It's a risky gamble, but then, he's never been one for the beaten path. Lucian frowned as he studied the arcane glyphs before him. It's nearly impossible to deploy on the fly in the heat of battle, he admitted, but its power is unmatched. By inscribing a set of exacting rules onto any object, or even into the air of a space, you conjure an invisible barrier. The moment someone steps into its perimeter, the incantation triggers itself, and brute force alone won't break it. Only those who meet the spell's precise conditions can pass through or leave. That, however, is also its greatest weakness. The wording must be flawless. A single misplaced stroke or a late revision will not only void the original enchantment, but can even invert its effect, turning your own ward into a defense that protects your enemy. Chapter 115, The Basilisk Attack, Update 1. Lucian was busy erecting the simplest kind of magical barrier around the school, nothing more than a basic ward keyed so that only mutants could pass through at will. Mundane, non-mutant intruders would find themselves unable to enter or leave freely. While this kind of barrier could deter ordinary people, it wasn't nearly strong enough to fool seasoned operatives. In his previous life, Lucian had never worked as a spy or intelligence agent, and he was all too aware that his hastily drawn wards probably contained loopholes. Civilians might never notice them, but organizations like S-Shield or Hydra would zero in on any trace of anomalous activity, and it would only be a matter of time before they tracked the school's hidden location. To bolster his defenses, Lucian had cloaked the entire campus with a Muggle-repelling charm. He knew that in the low-tech wizarding world, such an enchantment was all but imperceptible, Muggles can't even find Diagon Alley after all. But the Marvel Universe was bristling with advanced Black Ops technology, and he couldn't rule out the possibility that Hydra or Esield might possess devices capable of piercing his wards. For now, this barrier would have to do. If stronger threats did arrive, he'd have to reinforce it. But that, he knew, would require more time and far greater magical power than he currently wielded. Lucian reviewed the defenses one last time. If the Muggle shielding spell were ever breached, the primary barrier would still hold long enough to thwart any agents or spies trying to infiltrate the school, and more importantly, buy precious time for us to react. In truth, though, his own wand's power amplification in this world wasn't all that impressive. Since Phoenix Girl's hair here was merely a clone, it lacked the genuine Phoenix's blessing. As a result, this new wand was only marginally stronger than the one he'd crafted with a professor's hair back in his old reality. That meant the traceless extension spell he'd once relied on in the Marvel world was far weaker here than it had been in both the fairy tale and Harry Potter universes. Otherwise, he could have simply relocated the entire school into one of those expanded hidden spaces, utterly secure and impossible to find. Even now, the fortress remained effectively invisible to ordinary folk, and any would-be intruders would be hard-pressed to break through the barrier. If they tried to blast their way in with weapons, they'd still have to contend with Wolverine and Professor X, and neither of them was inclined to hold back. Speaking of Professor X, his recent rejuvenation had come at a cost. Transferring his mind into a younger body had reduced his telepathic rank from level 4 down to level 3. But even at level 3, Charles Xavier could instantly overwhelm the minds of any agents or spies foolish enough to penetrate our defenses. In short, though Lucian's tools had their limitations, the combined magic and mutant powers safeguarding the school made it as secure as it could possibly be. Lucian exhaled and let his staff clatter to the ground. Done. He'd spent the entire day mastering the basics of glyph magic, and at last the shimmering ward he'd woven now encircled the entire school. Yet as he straightened, his brow furrowed. We still need a better wand core. He thought back to his earlier experiments. The Phoenix Girl's hair had proven disappointingly weak, and dragon crystals from the fairy tale world were nearly impossible to procure. Lucian knew he'd have to explore more exotic options. What if he used the Hulk's hair, or strands of Thor's or Loki's? After all, gods and demigods, those wreathed in mythic power, should supply a potent magical conduit. Walking toward the dormitory under an early summer sunset, Lucian played the possibilities over in his mind. If he could persuade Odin to spare him a single lock, then combine it with Uru metal and a sliver of Yggdrasil's branch, he might forge a wand far stronger than anything known in the fairy tale world. When he ran the idea through again, the practical obstacles loomed large. The Hulk hadn't even set foot in New York. Thor and Loki remained in Asgard. Negotiating with gods, especially a trickster like Loki, was no small feat, and convincing Odin to part with Yggdrasil would and Uru required time he simply didn't have. Lucian sighed and shook his head. I'll focus on my magic for now. The Hulk might yet arrive, and Asgard's doors could open someday, but for tonight, Lucian would dive back into his studies. After all, mastering what lay before him was challenge enough. Dealing with Loki or the Destroyer would be a quest for another season. Lucian knew that if he hoped to bend fate to his will, raw power was non-negotiable. With the school sealed behind a ward of protective enchantments, he resolved to tune out everything beyond these walls and throw himself headlong into mastering magic from both fairy tale and the world of Harry Potter. He would spend the coming months honing his craft until his strength reached unheard-of heights. More than a month slipped by. In the Hogsmeade portion of the Harry Potter world, it was now May, and Lucian hadn't done much beyond one Quidditch match against Hufflepuff, though his team's decisive victory only confirmed his natural flair for the sport. Today, however, Gryffindor was facing Ravenclaw in a highly anticipated rematch, and the castle buzzed with excitement. As was his Saturday routine, Lucian finished breakfast in record time and strode to the library. Lately, he'd been engrossed in a particularly dark subject, the explosion curse. A notoriously destructive hex, it reduced anything it touched to shrapnel and ash, and carried a terrifyingly high chance of backfiring. Lucian knew the worst example all too well. Peter Pettigrew had once unleashed it on an entire Muggle street, leaving a dozen innocents dead. He was deep in thought, scrolling through margin notes on the curse's incantation and countermeasures, when the library doors burst open. Hermione Granger panted as she came in, forehead gleaming with sweat. "Hermione?" Lucian looked up in surprise. "What's the rush? Aren't you supposed to be at the match right now?" Lucian sat alone at a long oak table in the Hogwarts library, the hush of turning pages his only company, aside from Madame Pince, who eyed him sternly from across the room. Every other student and professor had slipped away to the Quidditch pitch. Gryffindor was due to face Slytherin today, and cheering for their team was impossible to resist. Even Hermione, the library's most devoted patron, was nowhere to be seen. Moments later, though, Hermione burst through the doors, anxious eyes scanning the shelves. When she spotted Lucian, relief washed over her face. She hurried forward and gripped his arm. "Lucian, thank goodness you're here. I'm convinced the creature in the Chamber of Secrets is a basilisk. Can you help me find information on dangerous magical beasts?" Lucian blinked, surprised by her urgency, but nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Together they wove through narrow aisles, Hermione's robes brushing leather-bound volumes. As Lucian pulled out one book after another, a thought flickered through his mind. Could today be the day she's attacked, just as it happened in the original story? At last, Lucian reached up and carefully extracted an ancient, dust-covered tome. He laid it on the table and opened it to a page illustrated with a coiled serpent. "Here," he said softly, "this one has a detailed entry on basilisks, their origins, characteristics, vulnerabilities. It's old, but the information should be exactly what you need." Hermione's eyes lit up as she pored over the text. Lucian watched her for a moment, chest tightening with worry. Today's match would have to wait. They had more pressing matters, and possibly a deadly monster, to confront. Hermione let out an excited breath as she rummaged through her satchel and pulled out a worn, emerald-green volume. "Here it is. Fantastic Beasts," she announced, her eyes shining. "This has to be the one." She tugged Lucian by the sleeve and led him to a secluded reading nook in the library. With a dramatic flourish, she opened the book and flipped through the pages until she found the chapter on the basilisk. Clearing her throat, she began to read aloud. "In our land, countless terrifying creatures roam free, but none is more bizarre or deadly than the basilisk, the so-called king of serpents. Born from a rooster's egg laid beneath a toad, the basilisk can grow to immense size and live for centuries. Its fangs carry a lethal venom, but even more fearsome is its gaze. Anyone who meets its eyes is struck down instantly. Spiders flee at the very mention of its name, while the roar of a cock's crow sends the serpent into a terrified retreat, for the sound itself can be fatal to the beast." Lucian leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "So you really believe the creature in the Chamber of Secrets is a basilisk?" Hermione closed the book and met his gaze with a solemn nod. "Every detail fits. We're dealing with a basilisk." Lucian and Hermione pressed their ears against the cool stone wall outside the library. In hushed tones, they reviewed what they'd pieced together so far. "Whatever's hurting people," Hermione began, "is traveling through the school's plumbing. Myrtle must have died because she came face to face with the basilisk's gaze. Mrs. Norris was only petrified. She saw its eyes in the reflection of some spilled water, whereas poor Colin didn't have any second chance. There was no mirror or camera to save him. And nearly headless Nick, well, he was already a ghost when it happened." Lucian nodded. "That all fits. We need to get this to Professor Dumbledore right away." He paused, then added, "What about Riddle's diary? Any new clues?" Hermione shook her head. "I have no idea who pinched it yesterday, but Harry told me just before we came here that he heard that strange hissing echo again in the tunnels. He's a Parselmouth, so he can actually understand and apparently locate the basilisk by sound." "That's terrifying," Lucian said, rising to his feet. Hermione stood as well, straightening her robe. "Come on," she urged. "If the basilisk is on the move again, everyone in Hogwarts is in immediate danger. We have to find Dumbledore before another person or animal falls victim." Together, they hurried off down the corridor toward the headmaster's office, determined to stop the creature before it struck again. Chapter 116, Lucian Falls from the Sky, second update. You should be the one under attack, Lucian thought as Hermione tugged him out of the library. With most of the students streaming off to the Quidditch pitch, only he, Hermione, and a handful of young wizards remained in the castle's corridors. Voldemort's giant serpent would almost certainly target Hermione first. She was Muggle-born, and besides, she was one of Harry's closest friends. Yet Lucian felt no fear. He intended to draw the basilisk out, clear Hagrid's name, and keep Dumbledore occupied outside the school. This was exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. "Coming," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. They had barely taken a few steps when Lucian's senses flared. Though his psychic gifts were no match for a professor's, they were enough to detect the basilisk's presence around the next bend. Its hostility was thick in the air, an icy weight that settled in his chest. "Hermione," he murmured, slowing. "Something's wrong." Hermione stopped as if she'd hit an invisible wall. Her lips quivered. Did you hear that?" From the darkness beyond the corridor's end came a low, rattling hiss. It sounded as though stone were grinding against stone, an agonizing, deliberate sound that sent chills racing down Lucian's spine. The basilisk was close, and it was coming for them. "Don't look back. You'll die the moment you meet its gaze," Hermione hissed, her voice trembling. "Keep moving forward." Lucian tightened his grip on Hermione's shaking hand and sprinted toward the spiral staircase. Behind them, the basilisk's footsteps thundered through the corridors, growing louder with each passing second. Hermione's knees wobbled, but her Gryffindor courage did not fade. "Lucian," she gasped, wrenching her wand from her robes, "you have to get to Dumbledore. Warn him about the basilisk. I'll buy us time." Before Lucian could protest, Hermione raised her wand. Instinctively, he wrapped an arm around her waist and produced his own wand. "Close your eyes," he ordered. "Don't look at it, no matter what you hear." He could feel the basilisk's hot breath on his neck. Summoning every ounce of his magic, Lucian drew in a deep breath and whispered, "Alarum Pinum." Instantly, a pair of gleaming white wings unfurled from his back. Cradling Hermione, he launched them both into the air just as the basilisk lunged, its fanged maw snapping shut inches below them. High above the staircase, Lucian leveled his wand at the great serpent. "Divine edge, shadowless," he intoned. A translucent blade of pure light erupted from the tip of his wand, slicing through the air. With a roar of agony, the blade struck the basilisk's raised head, and the creature retreated into the darkness, its hiss echoing down the stone steps. Breathing heavily, Lucian hovered in midair, Hermione pressed close at his side. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice soft but urgent. She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "Thanks to you." Together they turned toward the entrance hall, determination shining on their faces. Dumbledore needed to know, and they would get there, no matter the danger that lay ahead. The basilisk's magical defense proved astonishingly strong. Even Lucian's divine edge shadowless curse couldn't shatter it outright, yet the spell still seared the creature's scales with pain, forcing its enormous head to droop. Seizing the moment, Lucian beat his wings harder, surging forward toward the stairwell. Without warning, Hermione was swept up alongside him. Instinctively, she wrapped her arms around his torso and buried her face against his chest. "Lucian, can you really fly?" she asked, voice trembling. "There's no time to explain," he shot back, voice tight as he accelerated, each powerful stroke lifting them closer to the landing above. Behind them, the basilisk lunged again, its jaws snapping in midair. Lucian felt a thrill of control. He hadn't even pushed his speed to the limit. In fact, he'd been deliberately holding back, making sure the distance between them never grew so great that the serpent would give up the chase. And whenever the basilisk slackened, hesitating on its rocky glide, Lucian would flick his wand over his shoulder and unleash another shadowless curse, just enough to reignite its fury and keep it charging after them. Up ahead, the stairwell yawned like a dark promise of safety. With one last mighty beat of his wings, Lucian closed the gap. Emma clung to him as they hurtled toward the stairs, both of them counting on his uncanny control to see them safely to the top. Lucian pressed his hand against Hermione's back and whispered, "We have to make a real scene, enough that the students and teachers on this landing can't ignore it, and even the portraits up on those walls will witness our basilisk. Otherwise, No one will believe it's a basilisk and not an acromantula. Hermione's eyes widened, but she nodded. Together they edged forward, Hermione brandishing her wand, Lucian ready to lure the creature. In moments, the basilisk slithered into view, its scales gleaming in the torchlight. Below them, a panicked chorus rose up instantly. "Oh my God, what is that? Quick, get out of the way! Some poor wizard, run for your lives." Those shouts were exactly what Lucian had hoped for. The basilisk, roused by the commotion, followed him across the landing and down the twisting corridor of the 142 moving staircases. On either side, the portraits gawked in alarm, duchesses and warlords, school founders and glorious heroes, all frozen by the unexpected visitor. Satisfied, Lucian spun around, scooped Hermione into his arms, and sprinted up the stairs just as they shifted beneath the basilisk's weight. The creature let out a furious hiss, its forked tongue flicking in and out, but it couldn't climb the ever-changing steps. With a final, rattling roar, it slithered sideways into a nearby water pipe, vanishing with a splash. Lucian set Hermione gently on her feet. "Good," he panted. "Now, Dumbledore's out on the Quidditch pitch. Let's head straight there." Without another word, he swept her along the corridor toward the 7th floor, then slipped up to the 8th. There, in a dusty window alcove, he found a narrow casement. With a single push, they were out into the cool night air, flying free above the turrets and towers of Hogwarts, on their way to find Dumbledore and tell him they truly had a basilisk to prove. Lucian squared his shoulders as he hurried across the castle grounds. Once he found Professor Dumbledore and laid out the whole story, everything would fall into place. After all, the flying charm he'd just demonstrated was his own creation, no more improbable than Severus Snape's student-born masterpieces like the Shadowless Edge Curse or the upside-down Golden Hook spell. If Snape could dream up such powerful magic, why shouldn't Lucian devise a flight charm of his own? His peers had always marveled at his talent, and every ingenious trick he'd unveiled so far had led to this moment. True, he was only a first year, and genius often defies reason, but that hardly made his invention less real. Lost in thought, Lucian failed to notice Hermione Granger's curious stare as she guided him toward the Quidditch pitch. Her brow was furrowed, her eyes bright with questions she hadn't yet voiced. Finally, she broke the silence. "Hey, this is the 4th match of the season. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. You must be starving after all that excitement. How about we grab something to eat before the game starts?" Her warm smile grounded him. With Dumbledore waiting and Hermione's steady support, Lucian felt ready for whatever came next. "Oh, Merlin's trousers. What on earth is that?" From his perch in the announcer's box, Jordan was about to welcome both Quidditch teams onto the pitch, cheered on by the younger students below. Then something unbelievable caught his eye. A boy with a gleaming pair of white wings, Lucian, soaring above the stadium, cradling Hermione in his arms. Jordan's jaw dropped, and the entire stand fell silent in awe. Lucian hovered over the center of the phi. Elda glanced toward the professor's box where Dumbledore sat, then descended gracefully. "What are you doing up there, Lucian?" Snape barked the moment Lucian folded his wings and gently set Hermione on the grass. Without wasting a second, Lucian squared his shoulders and reported briskly, "Headmaster, Professor, Hermione and I were cornered by a basilisk near the library." At those words, every professor exchanged stunned looks. Dumbledore's eyes widened ever so slightly. Whether at the revelation that the creature in the Chamber of Secrets was indeed a basilisk, or simply that Lucian and Hermione had escaped its deadly pursuit, no one could tell. Lucian had never been certain whether Professor Dumbledore truly knew about the basilisk. He suspected the headmaster did, but in the end, only Dumbledore himself could say for sure. "Minerva," Dumbledore called quietly, "please announce to all students that today's Quidditch match is cancelled. Remain on the pitch, and once we've finished inspecting the castle, you may return to your common rooms." Professor McGonagall inclined her head gravely. With a quick flick of her wand and a sonorous charm, her voice boomed across the stands. "By order of Headmaster Dumbledore, the Quidditch match is cancelled. All students, please stay on the field until further notice." Dumbledore turned to Lucian and Hermione, offering them reassuring smiles. "Thank you both for your courage today, and as a token of appreciation, I'm awarding 20 points each to Slytherin and Gryffindor." He gave them each a kindly nod, then led Professors Snape, Flitwick, and the rest of the staff toward the castle. McGonagall remained behind on the pitch, her eyes watchful as she kept the students in orderly formation until the inspection was complete. Chapter 117, The Genius Who Creates Magic. Third update. The Quidditch match screeched to a halt when Professor Dumbledore, flanked by the other staff, swept urgently onto the pitch. Whispers rippled through the stands. This had to be connected to Lucian and Hermione's dramatic descent from the sky. But as curious first years surged forward, Professor McGonagall quickly formed a protective barrier around the pair. Had she not intervened, the students would surely have mobbed them with questions. Despite her best efforts, rumors flew faster than a golden snitch. What spell had Lucian used to sprout wings? Had he mastered a forgotten branch of magic, or was he secretly part avian wizard? For nearly 2 hours, the castle's corridors buzzed with speculation. At last, McGonagall summoned the prefects. One by one, they escorted their houses back to the common rooms, gently reminding the younger students that some mysteries must remain unsolved, at least for now. Inside the castle, Dumbledore and his colleagues scoured the grand hallways and hidden passages. They found no sign of the basilisk itself, but the shattered glass from petrified victims, claw marks on marble, and even confessions recorded in the enchanted portraits all pointed to a horrifying truth. The basilisk was still at large. Every trail, every whispered hint, led them to one chilling conclusion, that the creature lay buried somewhere within the Chamber of Secrets. And now, armed with this revelation, they would have to unravel its mysteries before anyone else fell under its deadly gaze. "Lucian, Hermione, this way, please." Professor McGonagall's sharp voice echoed down the empty corridor, and the two of them followed her in nervous silence toward the headmaster's office. Once the portrait hole swung shut behind them, Hermione leaned close and whispered, "Lucian, do you think we should tell her about Harry's diary and the basilisk's whispers?" Lucian paused, glancing out at the moonlit grounds below. Only he, Hermione, and Harry knew the truth. Harry had heard the creature's voice through Tom Riddle's diary, and it had shown him memories of the Chamber of Secrets and of Salazar Slytherin's heir. Harry hadn't agreed to reveal any of that yet. "Not yet," Lucian murmured back. "We'll need to talk it over with Harry first. For now, let's stick to what we're absolutely sure of, that the monster in the Chamber of Secrets is a basilisk, not a giant spider. Once Professor Dumbledore knows that, Hagrid can't be blamed for Myrtle's death or accused of being the heir of Slytherin." Hermione nodded, relief and worry mingling in her eyes as the heavy oak door to the headmaster's office swung open. They stepped inside, ready to tell the part of the story they could safely share, and determined to protect Harry's secret until the time was right. Lucian's heart pounded as he peered at the enormous stone sentinel blocking the corridor on the 8th floor. If the professors ever pieced together the clues and discovered the Chamber of Secrets, if they managed to slay the basilisk before him, his entire scheme would fall apart. He didn't need Dumbledore to be gone for weeks, as in the original tale. Even a single day's absence would give him just enough time to slip into the restricted section and copy down every potent dark spell. He nodded once, decisively. "Understood." Hermione glanced at him and offered a tentative smile. Even she knew they needed Lucian's approval before moving ahead. Then, as though to break the tension, she chirped, "Lemon ice cream." At that moment, Professor McGonagall stepped forward. She uttered a single crisp password, and the hideous stone creature guarding the hallway shuddered into motion. It leapt aside, cracking the wall behind it in two, and revealed a spiral staircase that rotated upward like a slow-moving escalator. "Follow me," McGonagall ordered. Lucian and Hermione climbed onto the revolving steps, which carried them swiftly upward. In no time, they emerged before a gleaming oak door, its surface polished to a warm glow and crowned with a brass griffin knocker. With a courteous nod, McGonagall pushed the door open. Lucian stepped inside and paused in awe. He had entered Dumbledore's office. The room was a vast, circular chamber, brimming with odd, whirring devices and soft, tinkling sounds that seemed to drift from every corner. Strange instruments hovered in midair, and shelves were laden with peculiar jars and ticking curiosities. It was a place of gentle magic and profound wonder. Yet now, for Lucian, it also held the promise of secrets he intended to claim as his own. Lucian pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into Professor Dumbledore's office. The room was alive with the faint hiss of steam and the occasional glint of moving metal. On a narrow table supported by slender, curved legs, dozens of peculiar silver instruments spun in place, each one puffing tiny curls of smoke into the air. The walls were lined with portraits of former headmasters and headmistresses, men and women alike, who snored politely within their gilded frames. Beneath them stood a massive desk carved with clawed legs, its worn surface cluttered with parchment, quills, and potions vials. Perched high above it, on an ornate gilded stand, sat Fawkes, Dumbledore's legendary phoenix. His ruby eyes surveyed the room, and his golden tail feathers shimmered in the warm lamplight. On a shelf behind the desk rested the tattered sorting hat, its brim frayed and its crown creased from years of wear. Lucian recognized it at once. The very hat that had greeted him on his first day at Hogwarts, sorting him into Gryffindor. He'd been here before, last autumn, when he'd formally signed his contract to play for the England Quidditch team. A snapshot of that moment, taken beside the headmaster's desk, still hung in his mind. This time, though, Lucian sensed a different tension in the air. Professor Snape stood on the other side of the great desk, arms crossed, his dark robes as still as stone. Between them, Dumbledore, tall, white-bearded, and twinkling behind half-moon spectacles, was speaking in measured tones. No other professors were in evidence. Lucian guessed they'd been dispatched across the castle, searching for any sign of the basilisk said to be lurking within. Dumbledore looked up and smiled warmly as Lucian approached. "Ah, Lucian, glad you could join us. Please, do take a seat." Lucian settled onto a cushioned chair, folding his hands in his lap. Fawkes gave a soft, melodic chirp from above, and the sorting hat let out a whisper of its ancient song. Outside, somewhere in the corridors, the castle groaned as if under a spell. Here in the headmaster's office, however, time felt suspended, held in place by magic, memory, and the quiet resolve of those who would defend Hogwarts at any cost. Professor McGonagall's voice cut through the heated discussion in Dumbledore's office. "Headmaster, Lucian and Miss Granger have arrived." At her words, Dumbledore and Snape turned toward the door to see Lucian, formerly known to you as George, standing beside Hermione. Dumbledore smiled warmly. "Please join us and have a seat. Lucian, Hermione, would you tell us exactly what happened when you encountered the basilisk?" With a gentle nod, Dumbledore motioned toward the plush sofa. A nearby house elf appeared almost instantly, bearing 2 glasses of freshly squeezed juice, which he placed before Lucian and Hermione. As Hermione accepted her glass, Lucian lifted his and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "We were in the library," he began, "when Hermione suggested we take a break and go watch the Quidditch practice." He cast Hermione a conspiratorial grin. "I didn't realize how quickly we'd run into trouble. We wandered down one of the less-traveled corridors, and the next thing we knew, the basilisk struck." He paused, taking a measured sip of juice. "I remembered the shadowless curse that Professor Snape taught me. I cast it just as the creature lunged, and it bought us enough time to retreat. Then, well, we had to get out of there fast. That's when I used the flying charm." Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "I always thought Severus was overly eager to teach you the shadowless curse at such a young age," he said, turning to Snape with a raised eyebrow. "I confess I was mistaken. Lucian, you handled yourself exceptionally well. But tell me, where did you learn that flying magic?" Lucian glanced at Snape, then back at the headmaster. "That was Professor Snape's doing as well, sir," he admitted. "He thought it might come in handy during our practical training, but he never mentioned it in passing." Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The explanations, though sparse, made sense, and one thing was clear. Snape had equipped Lucian with spells more advanced than anyone else at his level. And now Dumbledore resolved to find out exactly why. Lucian had just confirmed with Professor Snape that the Potion Master had never taught him this particular spell. The real revelation lay in how fundamentally different Lucian's flying magic was from the shadow flight techniques Snape had once learned under Voldemort. Voldemort's method transformed the caster into a wraith-like black silhouette, hurtling through the sky at lethal speed. Lucian's approach, by contrast, summoned a pair of radiant white wings that carried him aloft, wing beat by wing beat, like a bird. Rising to his feet, Lucian focused his energy and spoke the soft incantation that activated his new enchantment. Immediately, delicate feathers of pure light unfurled along his shoulder blades. "I stumbled across this spell in a flash of inspiration," he said, turning to Snape and their watching classmates. "I call it wing magic. It grows these wings so I can actually flap and fly." He paused, letting the wings shimmer for a moment before they dissolved back into nothingness. "It occurred to me that although the magic of Hogwarts and the magic of the fairy tale realm operate under different rules, they share core principles. After comparing runes and wand movements to the spells I studied from Fiore, I realized you can convert one system into the other. In fact, casting a fairy tale spell through a wand's focus would, in theory, magnify its power enormously." Lucian folded his arms confidently. "That's where I'll focus my research next, melding the best of both worlds." With that, he offered Snape a challenging look, ready to prove the promise of his discovery. In this version of the wizarding world, spellcasting has been transformed by fairy tale-style magic circles, which eliminate the need for time-consuming wand movements and incantations. Although Lucian isn't yet skilled enough to draw such complex circles himself, he has no trouble explaining their theory. When he demonstrated his wing spell and outlined its underlying principles in terms of this world's magical theory, Professors Dumbledore, Snape, and McGonagall were convinced at once. As three of the greatest wizards alive, they recognized that the mechanics Lucian described had never appeared in any existing text, and yet from their vast experience, they knew it would work. Chapter 118, Misunderstanding, 4th Update. In the hushed classroom, Dumbledore regarded Lucian with genuine surprise. "I never expected a first year to devise such a complex spell all on your own. Remarkable work." Until now, the headmaster had been cautious around Lucian, but this display of raw talent won him over. If Lucian stayed on the right path, his magical prowess might one day rival the greatest wizards of our age. Truly, our Slytherin students never fail to impress. Professor Snape, who had stood silently by, allowed a rare smile to flicker across his face. Lucian reminded him so much of himself. Not only had the boy mastered the sharp-edged shadowless curse at lightning speed, he'd also created an entirely new enchantment. Yet Snape's pride was tempered by concern. "Lucian, forging a new spell is no trifling matter. It carries real danger. You must be more cautious next time. If you encounter any uncertainty, come to me first." He spoke from hard-won experience. In the wizarding world, many promising careers and lives had been cut short by unchecked experimentation. Even Luna Lovegood's mother had fallen victim to the perils of untested magic. Lucian inclined his head respectfully. "Thank you, Professor. I promise I'll seek your guidance." Snape gave a curt nod, confident that Lucian had grasped the seriousness of his warning. Lucian's eyes gleamed with determination as he considered the possibilities. If Professor Snape could devote extra time to tutoring him, he would rapidly ascend the ranks of magical ability and learn those advanced spells every senior yearner dreams of. Disillusionment charms, apparition animagus transformation, the Patronus charm, not to mention the complexities of alchemy and even certain black magic defenses. There was so much still to master. Dumbledore watched him for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well. Severus, Minerva, please see Lucian and Miss Granger back to the common room. I'll discuss our next steps with the school governors." "Of course, Headmaster." Snape rose, the motion fluid and controlled. McGonagall followed, her gaze warm as she glanced at Hermione and Lucian. Hermione offered a small, polite smile, though Lucian noticed a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. McGonagall laid a hand on Hermione's shoulder. "Miss Granger, your performance today was extraordinary. With such brilliance, I have no doubt you'll someday invent your own spells." Hermione's lips twitched, but she remained silent. Lucian fell into step beside her. As they passed through the maze of corridors, he saw the tension in her posture and reached out, laying a hand on her arm. "All you do is read theory," he teased gently. "If it's any consolation, I'd trade half my phantom broomstick races for your library hours." Hermione looked up, her cheeks coloring. "You think that's a fair trade?" He grinned. "Honestly, I'd give anything for your knack at scrying ancient runes." He meant it. Hermione's mind was a vault of knowledge. He was still playing catch-up, relying on borrowed skill and a fair amount of cunning. She chuckled at last, the tension easing from her shoulders. "Well, I suppose we'll learn from each other," she said. "You with your extracurricular arrangement, and me with my books." "Exactly," Lucian nodded. "Between the two of us and Professor Snape's lessons, I think Hogwarts won't know what hit it." They emerged onto the portrait-lined landing that led to the Gryffindor common room. Behind them, the portrait hole swung closed, and McGonagall's voice drifted back, laced with pride. Hermione glanced at Lucian and smiled, genuine and bright. "Thank you," she said softly. He returned her smile. "Anytime. Now come on, fire whiskey and late-night studying await." With renewed confidence, they descended the spiral staircase together, ready at last to make the most of their unexpected opportunity. Yes, I'll try my best." Hermione's cheeks flared as she nodded so hastily she nearly wobbled. Her mind had gone blank at Lucian's unexpected request. Unbeknownst to them, Professors Snape and McGonagall, who walked just a few paces behind, had caught every word, and both wore looks of astonishment. Snape's dark brow shot up, but it was Minerva McGonagall's reaction that transformed her normally stern countenance. A warm, almost maternal smile spread across her lips. She would never have guessed that her brightest Gryffindor would develop a crush on the young Slytherin, especially the very Lucian who'd risked everything to rescue Hermione from the basilisk's jaws. As head of Gryffindor House, McGonagall felt only pride. After all, Hogwarts encouraged such bonds, so long as they didn't interfere with studies. If the school could sanction Professor Lockhart's Valentine's Day extravaganza, a little schoolyard romance was hardly a concern. If this were an ordinary Muggle school, any teacher who encouraged students to fall in love, write confession letters, or worse, slip them love potions, would be expelled the next day, if not handed over to the police. Yet Professor Snape's reaction was far more complicated. He first knitted his brows, then seemed to drift into some private memory, his expression gone distant, almost tender. At last, something like a smile flickered across his face, an emotion so rare it felt out of place on his lips. He broke the silence quietly. "Lucian, I must return to my office. Carry on without me." Hermione started, then recovered herself in a flurry of embarrassment. "Right. Thanks, Professor." She glanced at Lucian. "Give Harry and Ron my regards." With that, she hurried off, McGonagall close on her heels, toward the Gryffindor entrance on the 8th floor. Lucian nodded and watched them go before turning toward the stairwell. The Gryffindor dormitories lay just a few corridors away on that same level. Slytherin's quarters, by contrast, were buried deep in the castle's dungeons, down the grand staircase, past the entrance hall, and into the shadowy sublevels. A soft voice behind him murmured, "Do you think he was afraid?" Lucian barely registered it. His mind was already racing, replaying the echoes of dark magic he'd glimpsed in the forbidden section of the library, and the unsettling clues hidden among its dusty tomes. Lucian and Snape reached the Slytherin common room's entrance in near silence. Snape as taciturn as ever, Lucian offering only a curt greeting. Lucian was about to speak the password when Snape unexpectedly halted him. "Lucian," Snape said, his voice low but firm, "you're relying too much on magic to bridge every gap. Spend more time with her when you can, especially since you're in different houses. It's not as convenient as being in the same common room, and if you ever say something that hurts her feelings, be sure to clear it up immediately." Without waiting for a response, Snape turned on his heel and swept back down the corridor. Lucian stared after him, bewildered. Was he talking about Hermione? He and Hermione had grown close, despite being in Gryffindor. But romantic? The notion made him blink. Could Snape think there was something more between him and Hermione? Lucian let the door swing shut behind him as he mulled it over. Of course, Snape had lived this story himself, in a way. A brilliant Slytherin who was fiercely loyal to someone in Gryffindor, Lily. Lucian was every bit as devoted to Hermione, who'd proven herself just as exceptional in her own house. Seeing those parallels, Lucian realized Snape must have recognized the same spark between them that had once existed between himself and Lily. And now, Lucian knew, he'd have to decide whether to let it burn. Severus Snape was a half-blood wizard, and so was Lucian. Lily Evans and Hermione Granger, by contrast, were both Muggle-born. Oddly enough, They each welcomed a little Potter around the same time, and the two families formed a close friendship. Suddenly, it made sense why Snape had been so hard on Lucian. He was desperate to keep him from repeating the mistakes of his past. Yet the whole thing had been terribly misunderstood. The idea that Lucian might harbor anything more than a mentor's affection for 13-year-old Hermione was absurd. To him, Harry, Ron, Colin, Ginny, Luna, and Hermione were simply children in need of guidance. Shaking his head at the ridiculous rumor, Lucian decided to let it lie. There was no satisfactory way to correct the misconception, and it wouldn't interfere with his plan anyway. Noble, muttering the weekly password, Lucian pushed open the Slytherin common room door. The moment he stepped inside, a swarm of younger students clustered around him, bombarding him with questions. Since neither Dumbledore nor Snape had forbidden him to share what had taken place in the headmaster's office, Lucian calmly repeated exactly what he'd already told them. Word of the hidden chamber spread through the school like wildfire. The monster lurking within was no mere giant snake, but the fearsome basilisk. Most students recoiled in horror at the revelation. A few, however, Draco Malfoy chief among them, dismissed the threat altogether, insisting the great serpent would never harm a Slytherin, only prey on Muggle-born witches and wizards. Amid all the panic and bravado, Lucian quietly captured everyone's attention with something entirely different. He'd spent weeks perfecting a new flying charm, and that evening, in the Slytherin common room, he finally unveiled his breakthrough. As murmurs turned into astonished silence, Lucian swept into the air, skimming the ceiling in smooth, effortless arcs. Faces pressed close to every window and cozy nook as he demonstrated loop after loop, each more graceful than the last. By the time he landed, the entire house was buzzing, not about the basilisk and its supposed loyalties, but about Lucian's daring invention. Even Malfoy looked uncharacteristically speechless. In that moment, at least, wizards and witches agreed on one thing. Nothing about Lucian's flying charm would ever be the same again. Chapter 1 and 19, The Three Unforgivable Curses and the Fierce Fire Curse, 5th update. The next morning, Severus Snape slipped into the Slytherin common room well before sunrise. By the time the first green-shaded lamps flickered to life, every student was awake, lounging by the fireplace or finishing late-night homework. Snape's cold, dark eyes swept the room as he cleared his throat. "Effective immediately," he announced, voice echoing off the stone walls. "All students must return to their house common rooms by 6 o'clock in the evening. After that hour, no one is permitted to leave the dormitories for any reason. Each class will be escorted to and from lessons by a teacher, and bathroom visits after curfew require supervision. Furthermore, all Quidditch training and matches are postponed indefinitely, and no evening activities of any kind will take place." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the room, but the head of house said no more. With a slight nod, he turned on his heel and departed, leaving his charges to absorb the new restrictions. Later, as Snape marshaled the Slytherins toward the Great Hall for dinner, Lucian wove through the anxious crowd and fell into step beside him. "Professor," he asked quietly, "have they located the basilisk yet?" "Not yet," Snape replied, his tone clipped. "We've scoured the castle's plumbing and found only a few discarded scales, no sign of the chamber itself or its hidden heir." Lucian swallowed. "And Professor Dumbledore?" Snape's lip curled. "He's been suspended by the board in light of these events. He departed for the ministry in London last night. Until we unearth the basilisk's lair and identify the true heir of Salazar Slytherin, Hogwarts may remain closed indefinitely. Prepare yourselves for anything." A hush fell over Lucian as they entered the cavernous hall. Golden candlelight danced across long tables, but the usual buzz of excitement was gone. In its place, dread. The school seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the darkness to strike again. "If any of you run into trouble with your studies during the suspension, come see me at Spinner's End." With those words, Dumbledore dismissed them. Hogwarts was to be evacuated immediately. Every student and professor would leave the grounds, and the Ministry of Magic's aurors would seal off the castle. They would search every corridor, every classroom, anywhere the basilisk might be hiding, until they found and slew the creature. Only then could the school reopen its doors. Even Dumbledore himself had failed to uncover the Chamber of Secrets, so Lucian knew the Ministry's agents stood little chance. The suspension would likely drag on longer than anyone hoped. As Slytherin's most promising young wizard, he refused to let his education be stalled by this crisis. "Thank you, Headmaster," Lucian said, bowing respectfully. A determined light shone in his gray eyes. Dumbledore had left for London last night, an opportunity, in Lucian's mind, to slip into the restricted section and continue his private studies of the dark arts. The following morning, after breakfast in the Great Hall, Harry, Ron, and Hermione found him near the entrance to the corridors. "We've talked it over," Harry said quietly. "We're going to tell Dumbledore everything, about the hissing voice and about Tom Riddle's diary. If we're honest with him, maybe we can catch the basilisk." Lucian nodded. He understood Harry's decision. Keeping secrets from the headmaster and the rest of the staff had only brought them danger. It was time to lay all their cards on the table and finally put an end to the monster lurking within Hogwarts' walls. Lucian shook his head. "I heard from Professor McGonagall this morning that Dumbledore has been suspended and is currently being held at the Ministry of Magic in London. It doesn't look like he'll be coming back anytime soon." Ron's eyes went wide. "That's a disaster. Without Dumbledore here, who knows what'll happen? The school's going to be vulnerable. Attacks could start any minute." Harry and Hermione exchanged worried glances. Dumbledore was their greatest safeguard. Without him, they all felt a sudden surge of panic. Seeing their concern, Lucian drew a deep breath and steered the conversation to more practical matters. "We need to use the next few days to gather every scrap of information we can. I'm planning to go see Hagrid later today. Now that we know the monster in the Chamber of Secrets was a basilisk and not an acromantula, Hagrid's conviction should be overturned. He won't be implicated any further." Hermione's hand shot into the air. "Count me in. I want to help clear his name, too." Harry and Ron exchanged surprised looks. Hermione rarely jumped at the chance to volunteer for anything risky. After a quick breakfast, the five of them, Lucian, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and, of course, Lucian's own 2 broomsticks slung over his arm, headed out across the grounds. It was Sunday, so there were no lessons to hurry them along. They walked through the dewy grass toward the gamekeeper's hut, determined to set Hagrid's world right again. Hagrid told them that early that morning the Ministry of Magic had arrived with astonishing news. His wand ban was lifted. Although Dumbledore remained temporarily suspended, he'd produced clear proof that the creature in the Chamber of Secrets was a basilisk, not an acromantula. So the Ministry withdrew its murder accusation and restored Hagrid's right to carry a wand. Harry, Hermione, and Lucian all sighed with relief. By the time they left Hagrid's hut, it was nearly noon. Lucian, restless and eager to get back to his own project, excused himself from the others, found Professor Lockhart in the corridor, and secured a hastily written note granting him access to the restricted section of the library. Inside the dim, hush-filled room, Lucian felt the familiar prickle of being watched, but today there was only silence. He set his enchanted tablet on a library desk, a small device that projected digital scans of even the rarest tomes, and prepared to harvest as many forbidden spells as he could. Avada Kedavra, Fiendfire, Imperius, Cruciatus, he muttered, flipping from one ancient text to the next. One by one, he copied down each incantation and its ritual. He knew it was impossible to internalize that tangle of dark magic in a single afternoon, but if he could preserve the source material now, he'd have all the time he needed to study it later. Lucian worked steadily until 5:30 that afternoon, meticulously copying every incantation he could find. Then he tucked the borrowed magic tome under his arm and strolled out of the library as if he'd spent the day on perfectly ordinary studies. Over the next few days, he never returned to the restricted stacks. Once had been more than enough, and repeated visits would surely invite suspicion. In just half a day, he'd located every spell he needed. Now the real work began, as he resolved to master them slowly and thoroughly. Summer arrived almost imperceptibly. The castle and the lake beyond took on a pale blue sheen tinged with violet, and in the greenhouses, blooms as large as cabbages unfurled their petals in riotous color. Yet inside the walls, tension mounted. Since Dumbledore's departure, an undercurrent of fear wound its way through the school. Students' faces were drawn and guarded, Laughter in the corridors sounded brittle and swiftly fell silent. On another Saturday, Lucian slipped into the forbidden forest at dawn, found a secluded glade, and set about practicing the most dangerous of black magics. The fiery curse, the 3 unforgivable curses. None were simple. By midday he sank to one knee, panting, every muscle trembling. "Of course it isn't that easy," he muttered to himself. He gathered his robes and made his way back toward the castle, determined that, however slow his progress, he would not stop until he had mastered every dark art he had dared to learn. Lucian paused. He couldn't very well turn to any of the Hogwarts professors, not Snape nor anyone else, for help with this. What he needed was a master in the darkest of arts. That's way, and he remembered the fragment of Voldemort's soul trapped in the old diary. It wasn't the fully grown Dark Lord, of course, but the version who had ripped his soul apart at 16. Even at that age, Voldemort had mastered more black magic than most wizards learned in a lifetime, and surely enough to tutor a beginner like Lucian. In the past, stealing the diary had seemed unthinkable. Dumbledore would have noticed instantly, and the risk of the soul's influence might have been too great. But things had changed. Dumbledore was still tied up at the Ministry of Magic in London and wouldn't be back for some time. Lucian had the luxury of planning his move carefully. With the light-based charms he'd recently mastered, spells specifically designed to bind dark magic, he felt confident he could resist the soul's attempts to seize control. Strolling across the courtyard, Lucian's mind buzzed with the outlines of a daring new scheme. He wasn't the type to shy away from risk, and now, finally, he saw a path forward. Lucian needed a plan, but he couldn't cling to it rigidly. As his strength kept growing, he had to reshape each strategy to fit his evolving power, ensuring every adjustment pushed him forward as efficiently as possible. Chapter 120, Sneaking into the Girls' Dormitory, Update 1. Ginny, what's wrong? You've seemed so drained lately. It was Thursday afternoon, during the flying lesson, when Lucian strolled over and found Ginny slumped against a great oak, her broom abandoned at her side. Normally she thrived on these lessons, her laughter echoing across the pitch, but for the past few days she'd shown none of her usual enthusiasm. Lucian settled beside her. "You've barely touched your broom. Are you okay?" Ginny looked up, puzzled. "Lucian, do you think someone can be forgiven for a mistake they never meant to make?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think it depends on courage. We all make mistakes. Even Professor Dumbledore, they say, stumbled plenty in his youth. What matters is what you do once you realize the error. If you own up to it and try to set things right, people usually forgive you." "Really?" Relief flooded Ginny's face, and for the first time in days, her eyes lit up. "So, if I correct it quickly, I can still be forgiven?" Lucian offered a reassuring smile. "You have my word." Ginny sat up straighter, hope restored. Before school started, she'd uncovered an enchanted notebook hidden among a stack of old tomes she'd bought over the summer, one she was certain could help her fix everything. Lucinda Weasley had never owned anything quite like that old, leather-bound diary, and she would have given anything to erase the memory of it. From the moment she opened its blank pages, however, the book answered her as if it were alive. No matter what question she asked, no matter how small or large her problem, the diary always provided what seemed like sound advice. Before long, Ginny found herself confiding in it more than in any of her classmates or even her brothers. Each evening she slipped away to an empty common room, poured out her secrets, and waited for its reassuring replies. Then, almost without warning, the diary began to take control. Ginny's own thoughts slipped away, replaced by commands she couldn't resist. One afternoon, under the diary's influence, she crept into the Chamber of Secrets and unleashed a basilisk on the unsuspecting students of Hogwarts. A wave of panic swept the school as rumors of petrified classmates spread from corridor to corridor. Horrified at what she'd done, Ginny waited until everyone was distracted, then hurled the diary into a bathroom toilet, fully expecting the Muggle plumbing to carry it far out to sea. But fate had other plans. Harry Potter retrieved the soggy book and tucked it into his pocket. Ginny's heart thundered when she realized what must have happened. If Harry, or worse, Professor Dumbledore, discovered her writings, her darkest confessions would be exposed. Late one night, she crept into the boys' dormitory, fished the diary out of Harry's trunk, and fled before anyone could catch her. Her relief was brief. Within days, the diary's sinister influence reasserted itself. Under its control once more, Ginny reopened the chamber. Another basilisk prowled the hallways, and this time the danger was far closer to home. Lucian Blackwood and Hermione Granger, two of her dearest friends, came within an inch of losing their lives. The fallout was swift. Dumbledore was accused of negligence and temporarily suspended, while fear and suspicion settled over the castle like a cold fog. By Christmas, Ginny was more isolated than ever. That was when Lucian, stone-faced but determined, slipped a small, butterfly-shaped iron bookmark into her trembling hand. "I bought this in Diagon Alley," he said quietly, as snow draped the castle grounds outside. The shopkeeper swore it would protect the owner from dark magic, block curses, and bring good luck. "I thought you might need it." Ginny looked down at the delicate metal wings, tracing their intricate pattern with a pale finger. In that moment, she dared to hope that this tiny talisman might be the key to freeing herself and Hogwarts from the diary's terrible hold. Lucian handed Ginny the delicate butterfly bookmark. When she accepted her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Thank you, Lucian. It's wonderful." He smiled back. "You're even more beautiful when you smile." Before Ginny could reply, he reached out and ruffled her hair playfully, then turned and walked away. Ginny watched his retreating figure, then touched her hair, cheeks warming with an unexpected flush. Later that night, in the quiet of the Gryffindor girls' dormitory, Ginny slipped the butterfly bookmark into the diary's foreboding pages. She pressed it against the spine as if it were a shield, hoping Lucian's gift could counter whatever dark magic the diary held over her. Tomorrow morning, she vowed, she would tell Harry and the others everything. She closed the diary, tucked it into the box beneath her bed, and settled onto her pillow, courage blossoming in her chest thanks to Lucian's kindness. At 2 o'clock that morning in the Slytherin boys' dormitory, Lucian's eyes flew open. He sat up, drew his wand, and surveyed the 3 first-year boys sleeping around him. Though they rarely stirred at night, Lucian decided it was better to be safe than sorry. With swift precision, he cast the same silent sleeping charm on each of them, ensuring they'd remain fast asleep, no matter what might come. Lucian slipped quietly from the Slytherin dormitory and made his way to a deserted corner just outside the castle walls. A faint, silvery magic circle pulsed around him, and in an instant his frame stretched, his childlike proportions lengthening until he stood a full head above the tallest adult. Raising his wand, he whispered, "Glamorous makeover." In the next heartbeat, his too tight pajamas melted into a sleek set of dark nightgarb, leaving only a narrow slit for his eyes. The charm he'd just performed, the Garment Transfiguration Curse, was part of an advanced transfiguration repertoire, right alongside the snake summoning and bird summoning spells. Lucian had unearthed it in a dusty library volume titled How to Become an Elegant Wizard. Its purpose was deceptively simple. Transform whatever you're wearing into any style you wished, erasing the need to shop for new robes. If you delve deep enough into the castle library, you'd discover dozens of similar enchantments. They weren't the sort of potent hexes you'd use in a duel, but they made everyday life infinitely more convenient. Tiny conveniences conjured by wizards for the small wonders of daily living. After making his final preparations, Lucian flicked his wrist and summoned a broomstick out of thin air. He'd purchased it in Diagon Alley over the Christmas holidays and snuck it into Hogwarts inside a box enlarged with an invisible extension charm. Thanks to the new disguise enchantment he'd mastered, he could hide 2 magical items in that compact space. So instead of using a visible summoning spell, he simply retrieved the broomstick. Tonight's mission was delicate. He planned to slip into the Gryffindor girls' dormitory and steal Tom Riddle's diary, leaving no evidence of his presence. Mounting the broom, Lucian flew straight to the Gryffindor Tower and alighted on a narrow ledge outside the 8th-floor windows. He traced the enchanted magnetic sigil he'd affixed to a stray butterfly that frequented Ginny Weasley's room, his personal homing beacon. Knowing the main staircases were warded against males, he had no choice but to enter from the tower's exterior. With a steadying breath, he prepared to breach the wards and complete his mission. There's no protective ward on the staircase leading up to the Hogwarts boys' dormitory, so girls can slip in and out without trouble. As a result, Lucian often finds his room invaded by classmates, usually girls from his own year or older, each armed with a flimsy excuse for dropping by. Fed up, he spends most evenings holed up in the library or an unused classroom deep in the castle's basement. It's the same loophole that let Ginny Weasley sneak into Harry's quarters and swipe that mysterious diary. Tonight, Lucian was determined to reclaim it. He drew his wand and murmured, "Allaho," tapping the window frame. With a soft pop, the glass barrier vanished. He stowed his broom beside the sill, eased the window open, and slipped inside. Moonlight spilled across the tidy room. Ginny slept soundly on the bed, her tousled hair fanning the pillow. Lucian crouched by a low wooden box tucked beneath the mattress. He unlatched it, and sure enough, there lay the battered leather diary, its delicate metal butterfly bookmark still clipped between the pages. A small smile curved his lips. Earlier that day, he dropped casual hints to steer Ginny toward clipping the butterfly just where he could find it. Any other hiding place would have forced him to rummage and risk waking her. He tucked the diary into the inner pocket of his robes, closed the box, and eased the window shut behind him. Back in the corridor, Lucian slipped the diary into the common room cloakroom's locked trunk, then melted into the shadows before dawn. Lucian didn't slip out the window right away. Instead, he pushed open the dormitory door and stepped into the corridor, heading for the older girl's residence. After all, people trust their own assumptions above all else. He intended to weave another layer of misdirection around himself. Dumbledore was simply too sharp, and without extra precautions, his true identity would be exposed. Author's note: if you're enjoying the story, please support me in the end-of-month ranking. I'll keep the chapters coming.